Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Anel Baez Alvarez. Anel Baez Alvarez was born on March 17, 1998, in Guamachil, Sinaloa, Mexico. She grew up in a family with her father, Aide Alvarez, her mother, Hugo Beza, her brother Omar, and her sister, Aiden. As a child, Anel developed naturally and did not encounter any serious problems. Although she was initially a reserved child, over time, she became confident and charming, always trying to please those around her. Anel's father worked as a tailor, and the family lived a prosperous, close-knit, and happy life. However, everything changed when Anel's mother was diagnosed with cancer in the early 2010s. The whole family took care of her during her difficult treatment. After his wife passed away, the family was deeply hurt, but they did not give up and continued to support each other through the pain. This tragedy brought Anel and Aiden closer together, and they shared everything with each other. During the difficult times, Anel maintained a cheerful and friendly spirit. When she entered high school, she became an ideal daughter, managed the housework excellently, always took care of her younger sister, and got good grades in school. One of her hobbies was cooking for her family. Anel overcame her shyness and became one of the most popular girls at school. She formed a band and became the lead singer, developing a love for love songs, especially the ballad Amore Eterno. At that time, Anel also met her best friend, at least for a while. It was Erunde Elizabeth Gutierrez. They became an inseparable pair, admired by everyone around them and considered the most popular girls at school. Anel and Erunde expressed their friendship through social media. On October 14, 2012, Anel posted a photo with Erunde, expressing her joy at their friendship. She thanked God for giving her the opportunity to be close to Erunde and even considered Erunde a sister. However, as time passed, Anel and Erunde's relationship began to change. Despite being the same age, Anel and Erunde's personalities were completely different. Anel was a sweet girl who enjoyed listening to love psalms and spending time with her family. Meanwhile, Erunde lived in a dysfunctional family environment and became increasingly involved in the urban youth culture, commonly known as Buado, in Mexico. Erunde regularly attended musical events, such as the Calibre 50 concert at the closing ceremony of the Carnival in Guamachil in 2014. Erunde had clear political views, having shared on social media about attending a march in support of Joaquin Guzman Lora, also known as El Chapo. It is worth noting that Erunde often expressed her views on social media, unlike her friend Anel. The distance between Anel and Erunde grew over time. In 2014, Anel and Erunde both attended the Guamachil High School of the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, but they no longer interacted as closely as before. Instead, each created their own new group of friends. Anel became close to friends like Melissa, Karim, Manuel, and Maria Jose, who shared the same lifestyle as she did. She was often admired and loved by her group of friends, especially Maria Jose, who had known Anel since elementary school. Anel was always caring and helpful to the members of the group. She was also known for being polite and tidy. However, Erunde began to show a completely different personality on social media. She posted negative and disturbing content on her page, some of which was very alarming. Some of the posts looked like threats and did not make any sense at first. This raised concerns and suggested that Erunde might have serious mental health issues. Erunde's posts did not stop and became more and more suspicious. On March 3rd, Erunde posted another message saying, "Maybe not now, and not tomorrow, but soon. I assure you, I will not tell her anything then, but know that I have destroyed you mentally." Erunde's last post was dated March 16th, in which she wrote, "This really makes me desperate." However, no one knew who these threats were directed at. Rumors began to spread around the school that Erunde was angry with an old friend named Anil because they were no longer friends. Some even accused Erunde of being jealous of her old friend because everyone liked Anil. However, Anil did not care about what Erunde posted on social media. She celebrated her birthday with a big party, and everything in her life seemed perfect. But everything changed on March 19th when Anil did not pick up her youngest sister as usual. Hugo, Anil's father, received a call from the school informing him that his youngest daughter had not been picked up by Anil as usual. At first, he was not too worried and thought that Anil might have overslept or gone out with friends after school. But when he decided to call Anil to check if everything was okay, there was no response. Hugo thought that Anil might still be asleep after picking up her sister. He tried to contact Anil again but received no response. Despite repeated calls, she remained silent, causing Hugo's anxiety to increase. Hugo decided to go home to the Los Fuentes area. When he arrived, he found the front door wide open. Entering the living room, Hugo saw that some of the furniture had been moved, leading him to suspect that a robbery had taken place. He called Anil's name and searched the house desperately for her, but she did not respond. Hugo eventually went to Anil's room and tried to open the door but found it locked, which only added to his worries. Hugo knocked on the door several times but received no response from Anil. So, he broke the door open and entered. What he saw took his breath away. On the floor was Anil's lifeless body. He immediately called the police, who arrived quickly at the scene. When they entered the house, they found Hugo and his 10-year-old daughter sitting upstairs, deeply saddened. The police followed Hugo to a room where they discovered the body of his 16-year-old daughter, Anil. The police found that Anil's body had multiple wounds, and there was blood on the floor. It seemed that the attacker had tried to clean up the blood but failed. Through the autopsy, forensic experts discovered that Anil had been stabbed a total of 65 times. The police believed that the attacker had a close relationship with Anil. This theory was further supported by the fact that the doors and windows showed no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe that Anil knew the attacker and had let them into the house. They even speculated that Anil might have arranged a meeting with the attacker that day. However, when detectives checked Anil's cell phone, they found no information about her inviting anyone to her home. Therefore, they considered it might have been a chance encounter. Since there were no surveillance cameras in the area, detectives decided to interview neighbors. Some reported seeing a slim girl with black hair leaving the house. These statements narrowed down the suspects, and the police focused on a specific individual. They began questioning Anil's close relatives and discovered that they all had solid alibis. They claimed that Anil had no enemies and was very friendly. So they could not imagine anyone wanting to harm her. However, detectives noticed a social media post by Erunde, who expressed surprise at Anil's death. Some people expressed their condolences, but others criticized Erunde and accused her of being the murderer. They posted harsh comments, accusing Erunde of guilt. Erunde deleted her account, but the police were able to gather information in time. They summoned some of Anil's friends to ask about the connection between Anil and Erunde. All of them stated that the two had become estranged and that Erunde seemed jealous of Anil because Anil was more popular. After the interviews, detectives accessed Erunde's social media profiles and found threatening posts she had written months earlier. But the most notable was a post written just hours after Anil's death, in which Erunde wrote, "I was so stupid. Oh my God, what did I do?" Everything seemed to indicate that Erunde had become the sole suspect in the case. However, this information was kept secret because the police were concerned that Erunde might escape before they could arrest her. The agents were waiting for the right moment to act. The case attracted so much attention that hundreds of people gathered at a popular funeral home in Guamuchil to say goodbye to Anil. Anil's friends, relatives, teachers, and classmates cried and hugged each other, unable to believe that Anil had passed away like this. In the crowd, two people stood out, Arunde and her mother. Arunde entered the funeral home with her head bowed, her long black hair covering most of her face. Her outfit was unusual for the hot weather, as she wore a hooded hoodie with long sleeves, as if trying to hide something. Arunde and her mother went to pay their respects to Anil's family. They sat near Anil's coffin, where everyone present was whispering and looking at Arunde with tense expressions, noticing that she seemed very nervous. The police then approached Arunde and asked her to follow them to the police station. Arunde did not resist and went with the authorities. At the police station, the interrogation began. Initially, Arunde claimed innocence, but after a few questions, she opened up. Arunde showed scratches and bruises on her arms and torso, confessing that Anil had inflicted these injuries when she tried to defend herself in December 2013. The incident stemmed from a photo that Anil had posted online, in which they were caught hugging and partially undressed. Arunde did not like the photo because Anil had posted it without her consent. She asked Anil to delete the photo, but Anil ignored her. After a while, Anil finally agreed to delete the photo, but it was too late. Their friendship was irreparably damaged. The situation became worse when a classmate of Arunde's informed her that he had a sensitive photo of her, and she suspected that the photo was the same one that Anil had posted months ago. This made Arunde start thinking about revenge. Arunde had been expressing her anger on social media for a long time. On March 19, 2014, she wrote a cryptic statement on her personal page. Then, she went to Anil's house in the Los Fuentes neighborhood. When she arrived at Anil's house, Arunde brought 2 servings of ice cream and put on a fake smile. She said that she wanted to reconcile with Anil and be friends again. Anil happily agreed and led her into the house. She even invited Arunde upstairs to chat in her room on the 2nd floor, just like before. When Anil and Arunde entered the room, they started chatting and eating ice cream. After a short while, Arunde suggested watching a movie. She said that she was going to the bathroom and asked Anil not to stop the movie. However, instead of going to the bathroom, Arunde went downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed a sharp knife. Arunde returned to the room, hiding the knife under her clothes. She found Anil lying on the bed with her back to the door, giving her an opportunity to attack. Arunde pulled out the knife and started attacking Anil. Anil tried to defend herself but was unable to fight back. She lost too much blood and fell to the floor, becoming the victim of a brutal crime. Arunde became impatient. Knowing that she had to act quickly before Anil's family returned, she tried to clean up all the traces of blood in the house. Even though she used all the rags to clean, there was still too much blood. She could only clean up part of it. She finally went to the bathroom to wash her hands and then took Anil's clothes from the closet to wear. Arunde then closed the bathroom door and left Anil's body there. She left the house, leaving the front door ajar. This story of Arunde's made Anil's relatives very angry because they knew it was a lie. According to them, Arunde's description of Anil was completely untrue. In addition, Anil's friends insisted that they had never seen the photo mentioned in the story. The proceedings moved quickly. 4 police officers escorted Arunde to the juvenile court. After an hour-and-a-half-long hearing, Arunde was found guilty. Although she had carried out a deliberate plan and the murder was intentional, because she was only 16 years old, under Mexican juvenile law, Arunde was sentenced to 7 years in prison. She was transferred to a juvenile detention center. The victim's family thought justice had been served, but they were mistaken. The defense filed an appeal because the trial was held in the wrong venue. A higher court decided to reopen the trial. Despite the expedited process, the verdict was not overturned. This caused widespread public outrage. Hundreds of people shared pictures on social media with posters calling for justice for Anil. Several polls were conducted with over 5 million participants, and the majority felt that Arunde's sentence was unfair. They hoped she would receive a much longer prison sentence. However, after the trial was reconducted, the girl was still sentenced to only 7 years in prison. Hugo met with journalists and expressed his dissatisfaction. Although he was glad that the sentence was not commuted, he believed that Arunde's age should not have spared her from a longer prison term. Hugo hoped she would serve at least the full sentence. But that did not happen either. On July 6, 2016, Arunde's sentence was reduced to 5 years in prison. At the same time, the court also decided that if she behaved well, she could be released earlier. This event attracted dozens of journalists who took pictures of her, forcing state police officers to close the courthouse gates. The case became one of the most high-profile in the country. Hugo was not informed of this hearing, which made him extremely angry. The situation worsened when, on September 23, 2017, another hearing was held to evaluate Arunde's behavior in relation to reforms in the Federal Juvenile Justice Act. As a result, the girl was released after serving only 3.5 years. When Hugo left the court, he was extremely dissatisfied and felt he had witnessed a great injustice. Hugo expressed deep regret that the legislative reforms seemed to favor criminals over victims, and this seemed to be for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jessica Dishon. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. As the eldest of 3 children, Jessica took on significant responsibilities from a young age, helping her parents care for her 2 younger brothers while they worked. At age 15, Jessica started working part-time at a restaurant to save money to buy her first car, a red Pontiac. A few years later, she bought the car she wanted. Despite her job, Jessica excelled in school and began planning to attend college, where she hoped to study accounting. In the fall of 1999, 17-year-old Jessica was about to start her senior year of high school. She had also started dating a boy, which made her very happy. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, Jessica's parents went to work, and her younger brothers caught the bus to school. However, Jessica did not leave for school as planned. Later that day, around noon, Jessica's mother returned home from work and noticed something unusual. Jessica's car was still parked in front of the house. The mother went to Jessica's room, thinking that maybe she had overslept and missed school. But Jessica was not in her bedroom. The mother then considered the possibility that Jessica might have gotten a ride to school from her father, so she called him to ask. However, he told her that he had gone to work alone that morning. Jessica's mother suspected something was wrong with her car, so she took out a spare key to try to start the car. When she approached the car, the driver's door was slightly open, and Jessica's cell phone was lying on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, indicating that she had tried to call 911. Jessica's shoes and keys were found under the front seat, while her textbooks, work clothes, and purse were in the back seat. Jessica's mother was worried about Jessica's safety. It was obvious that she had tried to call for help but was unsuccessful. Furthermore, Jessica could not leave her belongings in the car and leave. Jessica's parents contacted her school, learning that Jessica had not come to class that day. When Jessica's best friend at work called her parents a few hours later, saying that Jessica had not come to work, they became even more worried about Jessica. Jessica's parents immediately contacted the police, but the sheriff downplayed the situation, suggesting that Jessica might have wandered off and would return home on her own. Despite Jessica's parents' pleas, the sheriff refused to open an investigation. Undeterred, Jessica's parents contacted relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but no one had any information about Jessica's whereabouts. They then searched the entire town, scouring the area, but there was no sign of her. The next morning, Jessica's parents returned to the sheriff's office to report that she had not returned home. The sheriff sent 2 officers to check Jessica's car. However, the officers searched the car without wearing gloves, potentially destroying evidence. Furthermore, the officers did not search Jessica's room. Feeling frustrated with the police, Jessica's parents sought the help of the local media, hoping to draw attention to Jessica's disappearance and the police's lack of attention. Jessica's family and friends, led by her father and Uncle Stanley, launched a search for Jessica. They also distributed flyers with information about Jessica. Fearing the worst, they focused their search on an area near a river, which was known to be a crime hub. For hours, Jessica's family members thoroughly searched the challenging terrain near the river but couldn't find any sign of Jessica. The next morning, Jessica's parents were at home and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, he rushed inside, saying he had heard a faint cry for help that sounded exactly like his sister's voice. Jessica's father immediately grabbed his gun and ran outside to find the source of the screams. At the same time, his brother arrived and joined the search. They quickly noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, 40-year-old David Brooks. As they approached, they saw Brooks undressing on his property. Jessica's father asked Brooks for permission to search his farm, but Brooks refused and told them to leave. This was not the only unusual behavior Brooks displayed. Before Jessica's disappearance, the 2 families had a normal relationship. However, soon after, he would drive slowly past their house, staring at them with an ominous smile. After seeing Brooks burning clothes on their property, Jessica's parents went back to the police, shared their concerns and asked them to come and meet Brooks with the dogs. The police agreed. The dogs were given some of Jessica's clothes to track her scent. They led the police to Brooks's fire pit, but no significant evidence was found. However, the dogs did find black gloves in one of Brooks's sheds that smelled like decomposition. During the search, no concrete evidence was found. Frustrated with the police, Jessica's father contacted the FBI for help. The FBI usually does not get involved in missing persons cases based on the family's request, but this time they decided to investigate immediately. After Jessica's parents presented the case and the family's findings, the FBI opened a full-scale investigation. The FBI proceeded to collect fingerprints from Jessica's room and her car, confiscating all potential evidence for further analysis. Additionally, investigators conducted a comprehensive search of the area using helicopters and volunteers. They thoroughly examined the pond near Jessica's home. The FBI searched Brooks' farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. This discovery led the FBI to strongly suspect Brooks' involvement in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, although despite a thorough search, the FBI found no evidence. Due to lack of incriminating evidence, the investigation focused on searching the surrounding area. 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call on September 27th. A woman was driving along a road near the river. Noticing something unusual near a tree, the woman stopped to check and was horrified to see a body. She called the police immediately. When FBI agents arrived, they discovered the body of a young woman who had suffered severe trauma. She was missing several fingers and toes. A rope tied around her legs showed traces of red and silver paint. Additionally, some of her clothing was missing, suggesting that she may have been sexually assaulted, leading the FBI to develop disturbing theories about the murder. Medical experts later confirmed the identity and determined that Jessica had been strangled. Her body also showed extensive bruising. Her limbs and fingers had been separated after death, suggesting that she was still alive when this happened. However, The most disturbing fact was that Jessica had survived for approximately 3 days after she went missing. This meant that the police had the opportunity to rescue her. But unfortunately, they did not take any action to do so. After the body was discovered, the FBI re-interviewed Brooks, who changed his story. He initially said he had seen Jessica near her home, but later said he had not seen her. His alibi was disputed by his wife, and he failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed to trial. The FBI said the likelihood of a conviction was low due to a lack of concrete evidence. While they had some troubling clues that pointed to his involvement, they were circumstantial and inconclusive. As the trial progressed, detectives continued to search for additional evidence. During a re-examination of Brooks' car, they found a rope similar to the one used to tie Jessica up. However, analysis showed no DNA on the rope. Brooks' trial began in January 2003. His attorney maintained his innocence, citing a lack of evidence. During the trial, it was revealed that investigators had found the victim's missing limbs but had not properly preserved them, causing them to decompose and lose potential evidence. The remaining circumstantial evidence was insufficient to convict, and the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, resulting in Brooks' acquittal. Under state law, he could only be brought back if new evidence was discovered. Jessica's parents were devastated by the outcome. The parents also felt that if the police had done their job properly, Jessica might still be alive. Over time, the case went cold and was largely abandoned, leaving the family without closure. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department and was tasked with reviewing unsolved cases. Lynn Hunt began by examining the murder case of Jessica. However, she was shocked to find that the original investigation was poorly handled, with case files containing errors and lacking key information from interviews with relevant parties. The evidence was also not properly documented, forcing Lynn Hunt to start the investigation from scratch 13 years after the crime. Hunt met with Jessica's family and obtained a box of her belongings that had been kept in her car at the time of the murder. One of her brothers, now an adult, had kept the box since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn Hunt was again disappointed by the careless handling of the evidence, as it had not been stored according to protocol. Her efforts paid off when she discovered a crucial document, Brooks' medical examination report, which revealed that Brooks had an IQ of 61, which is considered low. With a low IQ, Brooks may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. All of this led Lynn Hunt to think that this man might not have anything to do with the case. Lynn Hunt began to consider other suspects. Lynn Hunt conducted an extensive review of everyone connected to the case and those living in the surrounding area. This investigation continued until September 2014, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death. A coworker contacted Lynn Hunt with information about an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know who killed Jessica. Lynn Hunt initially dismissed the information as unreliable. Many inmates make up stories to get released early. However, Lynn Hunt verified the information before dismissing it. Lynn Hunt visited the prison and met a man who told her that he had previously shared a cell with another inmate. During conversations, the inmate revealed to him that he was responsible for the murder of Jessica Dishon. The informant revealed that Stanley Dishon, Jessica Dishon's uncle, had a dark secret. According to the informant, Stanley confessed to years of sexual abuse of Jessica while they lived under the same roof. He warned her that if she spoke about the abuse, he would kill her or someone she cared about. When Jessica started dating in the spring of 1999, Stanley became increasingly fearful that she might confide in her boyfriend about the abuse she had suffered at his hands. On September 10th, Stanley visited Jessica at her home when she was alone, and he saw her packing her belongings into her car. He approached her and asked her to end her relationship with her boyfriend. However, Jessica refused, threatening to expose Stanley's actions if he did not leave her alone. as Stanley threatened her, causing Jessica to reach for the phone to call 911. Stanley tried to grab her, but she broke free and ran back to her room. Stanley followed her into her room, striking her before binding her with her own sheets. Stanley then dragged her to an abandoned shed not far from where her body would later be discovered. Stanley held Jessica captive for several days, subjecting her to abuse and torture before ultimately killing her. Stanley then placed her body in a visible location near the road and buried the bloody sheets under the shed. Additionally, Stanley removed some of Jessica's limbs in an attempt to mislead the police, making it seem like the murder was the work of drug traffickers. Lynn Hunt was intrigued to discover that this crucial detail about the missing limbs had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest relatives were aware that her body had been mutilated, which meant the informant couldn't have fabricated this information. Furthermore, Stanley claimed to have buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Determined to verify the informant's story, Lynn Hunt decided to search for buried evidence. With limited resources at the local police department, she enlisted the help of Jessica's brother and other relatives, keeping Stanley's possible guilt a secret. She did not report her suspected evidence to them. On the first day of the search, no clues were found despite searching the areas described by the informant. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn Hunt returned to the scene. On the way, they noticed an abandoned barn on the side of the road and decided to search. Inside the barn, they began digging. Their search uncovered a buried bed sheet. Lynn Hunt collected the evidence and rushed to Jessica's home. Since her disappearance, her parents had left her room unchanged, which helped in verifying the evidence. Upon comparison, Lynn Hunt confirmed that the bed sheet was indeed from Jessica's bedding, as it matched the pattern of the other linens and was missing from her bed. Following this discovery, Stanley was arrested and questioned by police. Although he appeared visibly shaken during questioning, he refused to confess to the crime. Stanley was eventually charged with murder and the case went to trial. This news shocked Jessica's father. The murderer he had been searching for was none other than his own brother Stanley Dishon. As the trial progressed, Lynn Hunt dug into Stanley's past to gather more evidence. She knew that he had assaulted Jessica, but her investigation uncovered that several of Stanley's female relatives had come forward to report that he had sexually abused them as children. Stanley would approach his relatives, claiming he was temporarily homeless, and asked to stay at their home. However, when left alone with the young girls in their homes, Stanley would sexually assault them, threatening them to ensure their silence. Based on multiple similar accounts, police deduced that Stanley had been engaging in this behavior for approximately 3 decades. Lynn Hunt knew full well that a conviction for murder would be difficult, given the lack of direct evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, linking Stanley to the crime. Undeterred, Lynn Hunt continued her investigation and stumbled upon a box of old case files that had not been examined before. As she sifted through the boxes, Lynn Hunt was once again frustrated with the police who had originally handled the case. She noticed a letter dated June 26, 2002. A concerned person had written to the police at the time, recounting a story identical to one Lynn Hunt later heard from an inmate at the Kentucky penitentiary. In the summer of 2002, Stanley was serving a sentence for assaulting a minor family member. While in prison, he confided in a fellow inmate about killing his niece, Jessica. Unbeknownst to Stanley, his fellow inmate was a police informant who soon wrote a detailed letter to the police investigating the case, exposing the horrific events surrounding Jessica's death. However, police believed Brooks was the prime suspect at the time, causing them to ignore other potential leads. This inaction left Lynn Hunt deeply frustrated, becoming frustrated with the lack of professionalism of his colleagues. If the police had done their job properly, this case could have been solved in 2002. After all these years, Lynn Hunt could only hope that Stanley would finally face justice for his actions at the upcoming trial. The process began in 2015 when Stanley appeared in court, pleading not guilty. Jessica's parents were furious. The prosecution believed that a guilty verdict on the murder charges would be difficult due to a lack of evidence. There were also assault charges against other female family members. The prosecution would need these family members to testify in court, sharing explicit details about Stanley's actions against them. Given these challenges, the prosecution decided to offer Stanley a plea deal. In exchange for dropping the death penalty, Stanley would have to plead guilty to both the assaults on his relatives and Jessica's murder. Ultimately, Stanley accepted the deal and pleaded guilty. Jessica's parents, who wanted the truth, were unhappy with this arrangement, but Stanley remained silent in accordance with the terms of the plea deal. Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Since he was 56 years old at the time of his conviction, he could be released at age 71. Detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm, which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory. He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Whitton, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie, and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions, and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up, as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time, Christopher revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detectives' behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again, hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county, pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case were sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final, and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution, but it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. True crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore: the case of Lisa Holm. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998, in the small Swedish town of Hu, where she grew up in a peaceful environment with her parents and older sister. Lisa was a kind, positive, and determined individual with a strong personality. She had already made up her mind to study architecture in Australia before completing her education. Lisa's love for travel was sparked by numerous trips with her parents to various countries, which also instilled in her a sense of independence from her teenage years. To earn her own money, she took on part-time jobs. In the summer of 2015, at the age of 17, Lisa landed her first job at a cafe located about 40 minutes from her home. Initially, her parents drove her to work, but soon her father gifted her a scooter. The scooter was a welcome gift, allowing her to commute to work independently. However, for the first few weeks, her father accompanied to ensure her safety, as she had limited experience driving on the roads. Lisa only works on weekends and her father always takes her to and from the cafe home. However, on June 7th, her father decided to let her drive herself. On that particular day, her parents visited her at work during lunch, when the cafe was very busy. They had a quick snack together before returning home. Later that day, at 6:23, Lisa sent her father a text saying she was leaving work. 3 minutes later, he received a call from her, but there was no answer when he picked up. He heard a soft voice over the phone, and the sound of a car door closing, leading him to believe that Lisa had accidentally dialed his number while talking to a coworker. Despite calling out her name several times, he got no response and eventually ended the call, expecting her to arrive home soon. However, as the minutes ticked by, Lisa failed to show up, causing her parents to grow increasingly worried. It was her first time driving the scooter alone, and her father was deeply concerned for her safety. He attempted to call her multiple times, but her phone was turned off. After a few more minutes of waiting, Lisa's father decided to drive along the route she would have taken, hoping to meet her along the way. He drove slowly, scanning the road for any sign of her, fearing she might have been in an accident. Despite his efforts, there was no sign of Lisa. The man arrived at the cafe where his daughter Lisa worked, but she wasn't there. However, her scooter was parked outside, which initially calmed his nerves. But upon closer inspection, he noticed her scooter keys were still in the ignition and her helmet was hanging from the handle. This discovery raised his concerns, as Lisa would never leave her scooter unattended. Around the same time, Lisa's mother contacted the cafe owner, hoping to get some information about her daughter's whereabouts. The cafe owner claimed to be unaware of Lisa's location and explained that she had spoken to her employees earlier, who said they were closing the cafe. The cafe owner then drove to the cafe and met up with Lisa's father. Together, they began searching the cafe and its surroundings. The cafe owner also enlisted the help of 4 friends who lived nearby. As the search continued, Lisa's mother and older sister checked the bus schedule, thinking it was possible that Lisa might have taken the bus instead of her scooter. They drove to the bus stop in their town, but unfortunately, Lisa was not on the bus. Despite their efforts, Lisa's family was still unable to find her, and their concerns continued to grow. Lisa's relatives quickly contacted the police after realizing she was missing. It was nearly 1 p.m. Police quickly conducted an extensive search. A crucial discovery was Lisa's scooter, which was left in the parking lot with the keys still in it, leading the police to suspect she might have been abducted. Abductions are extremely rare in Sweden, particularly in Lisa's rural hometown, so the police responded swiftly by deploying multiple search teams with dogs and having officers canvass every nearby house. As news of Lisa's disappearance spread, her classmates and friends took to social media to raise awareness and potentially gather witness accounts. Despite the overnight search, no progress was made. On Monday morning, the police publicly announced Lisa's disappearance and urged anyone with information to come forward. Around the same time, a man working at a barn across from the cafe found a motorcycle glove on the floor and reported it to the police. Detectives re-examined a barn previously inspected on the evening of Lisa's disappearance and discovered a glove. They presented the glove to Lisa's parents, who identified it as their daughter's, providing further evidence for the abduction theory. Police have stepped up the search by sending additional personnel and equipment to assist. By then, Lisa's disappearance had made national headlines, drawing hundreds of volunteers to the search. On Tuesday, the police received multiple leads. A group of volunteers searched a dirt road near the cafe, finding a phone case, receipt, ticket, and broken smartphone screen. After discovering these items, investigators confirmed that they all belonged to Lisa, so they concentrated the search in that area. Further investigation yielded additional parts of the broken smartphone, Lisa's ID, and more receipts. These items were all scattered along the same dirt road, increasing the police's certainty that Lisa was indeed a victim of abduction. The search for Lisa quickly gained a large amount of attention and support, with the number of people involved growing significantly each day. This case became the main news story in Sweden. Hundreds of volunteers from across the country flocked to participate in the search. A group of local volunteers specializing in finding missing people also participated in the search for Lisa. This made Lisa's search operation the largest in Sweden's modern history, with over 1,000 people involved. The police received numerous calls with potential leads. A woman reported a suspicious incident while she was jogging the day before Lisa went missing. A man standing next to his car stopped her on the road and asked for directions to an unfamiliar city in English. When she tried to help him using Google Maps, the man asked her to get into his car to show the route on his navigator. The woman found this request suspicious and refused, continuing her jog instead. The woman shared a crucial detail with the police. She believed she had seen the man before, among the workers repairing a barn across the road from the cafe where Lisa was last seen. On the day Lisa went missing, her co-workers noticed something unusual. A witness saw two men standing across the road from the cafe, stared at the shop. Although the witness didn't think much of it at the time, but she shared this detail with the police after Lisa's disappearance. The following morning, Lisa's father and some friends searched the dirt road where her belongings were found. As they went further, they found Lisa's driver's license and house keys. It seemed that Lisa's abductor was throwing her belongings out of a vehicle. Despite all efforts, police and volunteers found no other clues in the area. That evening, a friend of Lisa's father was driving home from the search when he noticed that the police tape had been removed from the barn where Lisa's glove was found. He decided to re-examine the barn for clues. The friend retrieved a flashlight from his car as it was getting dark and searched the barn for several minutes. He soon spotted something shiny on the floor, which turned out to be a woman's earring, along with an identical earring nearby. The man reported his discovery to the police, who then showed the earrings to Lisa's parents. After confirming that the earrings belonged to their daughter, the police conducted a more thorough search of the storehouse. Initially, the detective explained that the primary focus on the first day of the search was finding Lisa herself. As a result, the barn was not thoroughly inspected, and small items like earrings may have been overlooked. This time, however, numerous forensic experts and search dogs were brought in to aid in the investigation. During the more extensive search, the police found a piece of evidence behind one of the walls that initially seemed unrelated to the case: human feces. Forensic experts, however, proposed an intriguing theory. According to them, in the aftermath of committing severe crimes, the perpetrator's body often releases a significant amount of adrenaline, sometimes leading to a sudden and uncontrollable urge to defecate. It's not uncommon for perpetrators to lose control of their bodily functions due to adrenaline during a crime. Given that Lisa's glove and earrings were discovered in the storehouse, investigators suspected that if she was abducted, the perpetrator might have taken her to the storehouse. They considered the possibility that the perpetrator, under the influence of adrenaline, might have relieved themselves and left behind feces. These feces were subsequently sent for DNA analysis. On Friday, the search area was expanded, and volunteers searched a farm approximately 2 miles from the cafe. The farm consisted of several large buildings with many employees, and the search team decided to inspect each one. Shortly after their arrival, 2 men appeared, communicating only in English as they didn't speak Swedish. One of them claimed that the police had already searched the farm, but the search team leader was skeptical. He believed he would have been informed if the police had indeed visited the farm, so he decided to proceed with the search. The 2 men observed the volunteers for a while before leaving. About an hour later, the search team discovered a pile of branches behind the cow sheet. Upon closer inspection, they found a motorcycle helmet, jacket, and headphones hidden underneath. The police swiftly arrived at the scene and confirmed that the items found were indeed Lisa's. To gather more evidence, forensic experts were dispatched to the farm for a thorough investigation. Detectives also investigated the story about two suspicious men who attempted to deter volunteers from searching the farm. During their inquiry, the police revisited a report from a woman who encountered an English-speaking man while jogging. The police had a potential suspect in mind. In the early stages of the search, they had visited nearby houses, includes a house where two Lithuanian brothers live with their wives. What caught the police's attention was that these three individuals did not speak Swedish and communicated in English, making them the only people in the area who did not speak the local language. Additionally, the police had other indirect reasons to suspect them. The brothers worked at a barn near the cafe and the farm where Lisa's helmet was found, indicating they were familiar with these locations. Furthermore, the dirt road where Lisa's belongings were discovered led directly to their house. The police decided to question the three individuals since they were the prime suspects. Meanwhile, forensic experts and volunteers arrived at the farm to continue their inspection. Their attention was drawn to an old, neglected trailer surrounded by tall grass, which seemed abandoned for years. However, the flattened grass near the door suggested recent activity. Trapped grass under the door also indicated it had been opened recently. Upon opening the door, the forensic experts were met with a strong smell of decay. Inside, they found a changing room with multiple clothing lockers. All are locked except one. This led them to suspect that Lisa's body might be inside one of the locked lockers. However, they eventually found Lisa's body in an unlocked closet, hidden behind a pile of old clothes and rags. Despite the small space, the perpetrator managed to fit Lisa inside. A rope was around her neck, and her head was covered with a large amount of tape. Her pants were pulled down, and her shirt was pulled up. Medical experts concluded that Lisa's cause of death was strangulation, with no evidence of sexual assault. Her clothing was sent to the lab for further examination. As news of her body's discovery spread rapidly across the country, the case had already been making headlines in Sweden. The brutality of Lisa's murder shocked the entire nation, as such crimes were extremely rare in Sweden. A strange and disturbing discovery was made on YouTube the same day her body was discovered. A video titled 13, featuring a countdown timer, had been posted 13 days before the murder. What makes this video scarier is that it was uploaded to a channel called Lisa Home. News of the video spread quickly through the media, leaving many people stunned by the series of coincidences. Some speculated that the murder had been predicted, but it was later revealed that the channel name and video title had been changed after Lisa's body was discovered, explaining the eerie coincidence. This has raised concerns that this could be a joke or an attempt to create another conspiracy theory. Meanwhile, the police worked day and night tirelessly to catch Lisa's murderer and solve the case as quickly as possible. At the time of the discovery, investigators had already questioned two brothers and a woman, all of whom denied any involvement in the murder. The three individuals claimed to have been at home at the time of the abduction, providing alibis for one another. According to their accounts, the older brother, Narigis, was asleep in his room while his wife was preparing dinner, and the younger brother was using the computer. Narigis also stated that around 8 p.m., he woke up and went to a gas station to buy pizza and cigarettes. The police were skeptical of their alibis, as it was possible that the three were covering for each other. DNA samples were collected, but initially, no evidence directly linked any of them to the murder. However, this was short-lived. Forensic experts were working diligently in the storehouse and on the farm, utilizing all available resources, and soon their efforts paid off. In the storehouse, a small office-like room was discovered with a large window overlooking the cafe. Upon investigation, experts found 15 semen stains on the walls and floor near the window, suggesting someone had been standing there, watching the cafe employees, including Lisa, and engaging in self-gratification. The semen samples were sent to the lab for analysis, and DNA profiles were quickly extracted. All 15 samples matched the DNA of 35-year-old Narigis. Additionally, the feces found in the storehouse also belonged to him. In the adjacent room, previously used for storing cow's milk, forensic experts noticed a pipe about 2 feet above the floor with a thick layer of dust, except for a small strip. The size of this strip matched the rope used to strangle Lisa. Blood was also found on the pipe, and DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Narigis. On the floor beneath the pipe, a piece of the same rope was discovered. Experts analyzed it and found 2 DNA profiles, Lisa's and Narigis's. This discovery was an important clue for the police. This indicates that the rope used to kill Lisa was related to Narigis. A crucial piece of evidence was discovered in the room where Lisa's body was found, a hair belonging to her. Further investigation revealed DNA traces from Narigis on Lisa's jacket, leading the police to believe she was killed in that location. Police have been studying the evidence and using it to piece together what might have happened. Narigis had been watching the cafe for some time and waited for an opportunity to strike. When Lisa was alone in the parking lot, he approached her, possibly asking for directions or using another tactic to gain her trust. He may have then asked her to get into his car to enter the route into the GPS system. Given Lisa's kind nature and willingness to help others, it's likely she agreed to help him. Once she was in the car, Narigis taped her mouth shut and drove her to the storehouse. There, he bound her with a rope. According to medical experts, the killer's adrenaline rush at the scene may have caused him to lose control of his bodily functions, resulting in defecation on the floor. After Lisa's death, the perpetrator placed her body in the car and drove to the farm, discarding her belongings along the way. He then hid her body in the trailer locker, covering it with old clothes. The entire ordeal, from abduction to hiding the body, took the perpetrator less than an hour. Narigis maintains his innocence despite mounting evidence against him. His wife and younger brother were released due to lack of evidence and promptly returned to their home country, Lithuania. The trial preparations were intense, with Narigis claiming his DNA was found at the crime scene because he had worked in the storehouse for a long time. He also provided an alibi, which was corroborated by his wife and brother, although their credibility was questionable. This defense may work in court, but the finding of Narigis' DNA on Lisa's clothing suggests direct contact on the day of the murder. Furthermore, a witness reported seeing Narigis' car near the cafe around the time of Lisa's abduction, contradicting his alibi. The car was seen driving back and forth between the cafe and the farm, while Narigis claimed to have been sleeping at home, according to his brother and wife. Months after Lisa's body was discovered, experts continued to analyze the evidence using advanced equipment. They found Narigis' DNA on nearly all of Lisa's clothing, including her underwear. Given the high-profile nature of the case, investigators sought additional clues to solidify the evidence against Narigis. As part of their investigation, they traveled to Lithuania to re-question Narigis' wife and brother. Narigis' wife maintained her initial alibi, claiming he was at home between 6 o'clock and 8 p.m. However, when detectives spoke with Narigis' younger brother, they finally obtained the information they needed. After being presented with the evidence against Narigis and the details of the crime, the younger brother revealed that Narigis was not at home that evening. According to the younger brother, Narigis returned around 7:30 p.m., covered in dirt, and immediately washed his clothes. When the police began questioning the residents and approached their house, Narigis instructed his brother to tell police he was home at the time of the crime. Narigis later explained that he was afraid of being wrongly accused due to his immigrant status and lack of alibi during the abduction. The younger brother initially believed Narigis innocent, but after learning about the evidence, he realized this wasn't true. A month after murder, a large crowd attended Lisa's funeral, far exceeding the church's capacity of 130 people. To accommodate the mourners, organizers set up benches and large screens outside, allowing everyone to watch the ceremony. 4 months later, the trial began. Narigis' lawyer argued that his client's DNA on Lisa's clothing could be explained by his work in the storehouse. However, the prosecution countered that this explanation didn't hold up, especially regarding Lisa's underwear. The only plausible way Narigis' DNA could have ended up on her underwear was through direct contact. The lawyer failed to provide any evidence supporting Narigis' innocence. At one point, lawyers suggested an alternative theory, that Narigis' younger brother was the real killer. The lawyer failed to address the possibility of DNA manipulation during the trial, which lasted a month and resulted in Narigis being found guilty of murder. He was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment in a high-security Swedish prison, which offered relatively comfortable living conditions. Narigis' lawyer attempted to appeal the verdict but was unsuccessful. In 2017, Narigis made a surprising decision when he requested to be deported to a prison in Lithuania. Despite Lithuanian prisons being notoriously worse than Swedish ones, the court granted his request, probably because it would result in substantial cost savings for Swedish taxpayers. It did not take long to understand the reason behind Narigis' decision. He appealed to the Lithuanian court and successfully had his sentence reduced from life to 15 years. However, this victory was short-lived, as the court later overturned the decision, reinstating his life sentence. Unfortunately for Narigis, he was now stuck in a Lithuanian prison, with no chance of returning to the more comfortable Swedish prison. In August 2022, 5 years after his initial imprisonment, Narigis has been transferred to another prison in Lithuania, where he encountered another life-threatening situation. During a block transfer, an inmate attacked Narigis with a shank, causing severe injuries that ultimately led to his death on the way to the hospital. Regarding Narigis' wife, the question of her involvement in the crime remains unclear. Although police believe it is highly unlikely that she was directly involved in the abduction or murder, they do not rule out the possibility that she may have been aware of her husband's actions and provided a false alibi to help him. If she had been directly involved, experts would have likely found her DNA on Lisa's clothing or belongings. Additionally, Narigis' younger brother has raised suspicions. Cafe employees reported seeing 2 men, likely Narigis and his younger brother, standing near the barn and watching the employees. However, the younger brother's DNA was not found in the barn or on Lisa's clothing, making his involvement in the murder unlikely. It is possible that the brothers were indeed observing the employees and discussing inappropriate topics, but only Narigis ultimately committed the crime. Detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Angie Hausman. Angie Hausman was born on February 18, 1984, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father had left the family before her birth, and as a result, she never had the opportunity to know him. When Angie was 1 year old, her mother married a man named Ronald, and they had a son together. Angie got along well with her stepfather and was very close to her younger brother. Angie was a friendly and outgoing child who easily made friends with those around her. She lived with her family in a quiet suburban area of St. Louis. In 1993, at the age of 9, Angie attended the 4th grade at a local elementary school, which was just over a mile from her home. To get to school, she would take the bus from a nearby stop, and her parents felt relatively safe allowing her to travel alone due to the stop's proximity to their house. Angie usually walked to the bus stop with other neighborhood children, and after school, they would be watched over by several parents who would keep an eye on them from their windows as they made their way home. A tradition established in the neighborhood was that locals would watch over children and make sure they got home safely from the bus stop. On November 18th, Angie followed her usual routine and attended school, finishing at 3 p.m. She boarded the school bus with some neighborhood kids and got off at her stop. The other kids lived closer to the stop, so they walked ahead, leaving Angie to walk the remaining short distance home alone. However, Angie failed to arrive home, which was unusual. Her parents started to worry about half an hour later. They decided to walk along Angie's usual route from their house to the bus stop to see if they could find her. During their search, they spoke with other kids from Angie's school. They confirmed that she had gotten off the bus with them and was walking toward her home. Her parents also talked to neighbors who usually kept an eye on the kids but were busy that day and didn't see anything. Angie's parents and their friends combed the area but couldn't find her. As night began to fall, Angie's parents decided to call the police for assistance. Police officers quickly joined the search for Angie. The cold weather made it unlikely that she would have wandered off on her own, so they initially focused on the possibility of something more serious happening to her. A recent kidnapping in the neighborhood, involving an 11-year-old girl just 10 days earlier, further heightened their concerns. The man had approached the girl as she got off the school bus and tried to drag her into the bushes, but she managed to escape. Since the man was still at large, the police considered the possibility that he might be involved in Angie's disappearance. The police brought in dogs trained to track scents, and the dogs picked up Angie's scent near the bus stop. The dogs followed the scent for about half the distance to Angie's house, but then lost it. This suggested that Angie might have gotten into a vehicle at that point, which made the police think that she might have been abducted. The police also used helicopters with special sensors to search the area and looked along the banks of a small stream near Angie's home, but they did not find Angie or any of her belongings. The first day of the search for Angie yielded no results, prompting the police to reach out to the media for assistance. As a result, news of her disappearance spread rapidly throughout the city, generating over 300 calls to the police department within 24 hours. More than 20 additional officers were brought in to help handle the large number of new leads in the case. Despite this effort, none of the leads led to Angie's discovery. Detectives explored every possible scenario, and from the early stages of the investigation, they began to scrutinize Angie's stepfather. He denied any involvement in her disappearance and claimed he would never harm her. To clear his name, he agreed to a polygraph test and other checks, urging the police to focus on finding Angie rather than wasting time on him. The investigation also led to the discovery of Angie's biological father, who had never had any direct contact with his daughter. However, her mother reported that he had been seen driving past their house on multiple occasions, watching Angie play outside. Although this behavior raised suspicions among detectives, the man had a solid alibi that checked out. On the third day of Angie's disappearance, the FBI stepped in to assist the police department, which then allocated even more officers to the case. Everyone realized that something awful must have occurred to Angie, as it was unlikely she could have survived on her own in the freezing weather. A new lead emerged. Someone reported a suspicious man driving a blue sedan slowly through Angie's neighborhood. The description of this man matched the one given by a girl who had narrowly escaped an abduction attempt just 10 days before Angie vanished. The police created a composite sketch of the suspect and featured it in the news. Volunteers distributed thousands of flyers with the sketch. But the man's identity remained a mystery. As the case gained national attention, it was covered on television, attracting even more leads. The police carefully examined each new lead, but none of them led to Angie's discovery. The case also drew in psychics. They began calling Angie's home to share their alleged visions. One psychic claimed that Angie was alive and even provided a specific location where she being held, a large national park 25 miles from her home. However, the detectives did not give any credence to these claims. A reward of $10,000 was offered to anyone who could provide information about Angie's disappearance, which led to a large number of tips being submitted. During the investigation, detectives discovered a concerning detail. Angie had told her teacher a few days before she vanished that she planned to go on a nature trip with her uncle. However, Angie's parents were unaware of any uncle, and it seemed Angie had fabricated this story. This led investigators to consider the possibility that Angie might have known her abductor beforehand and referred to them as her uncle. Unfortunately, the conversation with her teacher did not provide any information about this mysterious individual. The investigation stalled, with no progress made in the following days. On November 27th, 9 days after Angie's disappearance, an important development in the case was found. A hunter contacted the police, reported that he found a body in the woods of a national park. Upon arriving at the scene, police were met with a disturbing sight. A young girl's body was tied to a tree, naked, with her head completely wrapped in tape except for her nose. Her hands were also bound with handcuffs. Near where the body was found, they found a bag containing personal items, which were quickly identified as Angie's remains. Among the belongings were notebooks with her name. After being transferred to the medical examiner, a detailed examination of the body revealed additional shocking facts. The removal of tape from her head uncovered a piece of underwear lodged in her mouth. The autopsy results indicated that Angie's death had occurred only a few hours before the body was discovered. This suggested she was held captive for 9 days, only to be left to freeze to death at the scene. Experts further determined that Angie suffered numerous injuries and had been sexually assaulted during her ordeal. Forensic analysts carefully inspected every proof collected from the crime scene and identified a fingerprint on the tape used to wrap Angie's head. They cross-referenced this evidence against potential suspects in their database, but unfortunately, this led to no new leads. The discovery of the body accelerated the police investigation, prompting the allocation of additional resources to help solve the case. The community was shocked by the extreme brutality of the crime and was deeply concerned for their children's safety, with many escorting their kids to bus stops and keeping a close watch over them at all times. A few days after Angie's discovery, concerns escalated further. On December 1st, 10-year-old Cassidy went missing from a nearby town, just 10 miles from Angie's home. Cassidy asked her mother for permission to visit friends who lived just a few hundred yards away, but then she disappeared. Cassidy's disappearance sparked an extensive police investigation, and detectives began to suspect the possibility that Cassidy's case might be linked to a serial killer. Although they considered the possibility that the same person was behind both abductions, they lacked concrete evidence to support this theory. 10 days later, Cassidy's body was found in St. Louis, wrapped in bed sheets and covered with a pink curtain. The cause of death was severe head injuries. Despite efforts, detectives couldn't find any leads to the killer. Furthermore, they started questioning whether the same person was responsible for both Angie's and Cassidy's deaths. Detectives suspected they might be dealing with two different killers due to the distinct characteristics of the crimes. Around the same time, they identified a 37-year-old man named Gary as a potential suspect. Gary had previously attempted to abduct a girl just before Angie went missing and regularly traveled to St. Louis for work. The man was initially investigated for potential involvement in the murders of Angie and Cassidy, but he had an alibi for the time of their disappearances. Although he was not connected to these crimes, he did admit to assaulting 4 other girls and was subsequently sentenced to 5 years in prison. In February of the following year, a significant development in the case was revealed when detectives finally found Cassidy's body. Nearby, they found tire tracks that were identified as coming from a pickup truck model frequently used by a prominent car rental company. The distinctive vehicles were easily recognizable due to their vibrant brand logos. With this new information, detectives interviewed residents in Cassidy's neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen one of these pickup trucks. One woman reported seeing a vehicle from the car rental company near her neighbor's house about a week after Cassidy's disappearance. Police found a woman who lived with her husband and brother at the house they were investigating. When questioned, the woman claimed neither she nor her husband, brother had rented the pickup associated with the crime, and they had no involvement in the case. However, detectives were skeptical of her claims and obtained a search warrant for the house. Upon searching the house, investigators found blood traces from the victim, Cassidy, in the basement, along with the murder weapon. Further investigation revealed that the woman's brother, Thomas, was the one who had rented the pickup in question. Initially, Thomas denied any involvement but eventually confessed when confronted with the evidence. According to Thomas's confession, Cassidy had come to his door, wanting to invite his nephews out to play. He invited her into the house and led her to the basement, where he attempted to assault her. When Cassidy screamed, Thomas struck her with a heavy object and then covered her body with bed sheets. After committing the crime, Thomas went to work as usual. Upon returning home, his sister told him that she had discovered the body in the basement. She made it clear that she didn't want to know the details of what happened and insisted that the body be disposed of immediately. Cassidy's body remained in the basement for a week due to ongoing searches, and Thomas was too afraid to move it. Once things had calmed down, he rented a pickup truck and took the body to St. Louis. He hid her body there. Thomas was eventually sentenced to death for his crimes but died in prison several years later due to illness. Despite being questioned about Angie's case, he maintained his innocence, leading detectives to conclude that the crimes were unrelated. The investigation stalled for many months with few leads coming in. Years after Angie's murder, detectives faced another challenge when the reward for information was set to expire, sparking concerns that the public would stop providing tips and assistance in the case. However, in 2001, a local businessman donated $250,000 as a reward for information on Angie's case. This large sum of money caused a spike in many information to the police. But unfortunately, there are no clues to help solve the case. In 2001, a new development emerged in the Angie Houseman case when Corey Fox, an inmate, turned himself in and confessed to multiple murders, including the murder of Angie Houseman. Corey Fox provided detailed information about Angie's abduction and captivity, including being tied to a tree, with her underwear used as a gag. However, upon further questioning, detectives found inconsistencies in his confession, such as incorrectly stating that Angie's hands were restrained with plastic handcuffs instead of iron ones. Further investigation revealed that Corey Fox also fabricated parts of his confession, possibly due to extensive media coverage of Angie's case. Another tragic case happened in 2002, the abduction and murder of a 6-year-old girl, briefly sparked renewed interest in Angie's case. However, it was soon determined that the two cases were unrelated. The perpetrator in the 2002 case was a neighbor. He quickly confessed during interrogation, while Angie's case remained unsolved. Several years after Angie's murder, detectives reopened the case in 2007. They re-examined the documents and found a peculiar detail. A man named Roger Martin was in a parked car near the crime scene when Angie's body was discovered. When questioned, Roger claimed he was in the area for hunting, but a search of his car found no hunting gear. Further investigation revealed that Roger had a criminal record involving children, including an assault near the location where Angie's body was found. These crimes occurred before Angie's death, but the police had not thoroughly investigated Roger at the time. The new detective team called Roger in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Angie's murder, claiming he was in the area by chance. Roger stated that he was still at work when Angie's body was left at the crime scene. The investigation stalled after a 9-hour interrogation of Roger failed to yield results. Although his fingerprints were taken and compared to those on the tape from Angie's head, No match was found, leading to his release due to insufficient evidence. The case remained stagnant until 2018 when the St. Louis Police Department established a dedicated task force to re-examine the evidence using advanced technology. The team focused on three crucial pieces of evidence: the handcuffs, the tape from Angie's head, and the underwear used to silence her. Despite previous failed attempts to find the perpetrator's DNA on these items, the detectives were determined to try again. They began by re-examining the handcuffs but encountered difficulties due to the presence of Angie's blood. They then turned their attention to the tape from Angie's head but discovered it had deteriorated over time, meaningless their efforts. The investigators examined the underwear as a last resort, despite low expectations due to it being in Angie's mouth for several hours, which could have erased any foreign DNA. Using advanced technology, they thoroughly inspected every inch of the underwear and eventually found a tiny sample of unfamiliar DNA, sufficient for analysis. The DNA was confirmed to belong to a male and was immediately uploaded to the FBI database. In cases like this, it's common for the DNA not to match anyone in the database, requiring further efforts to identify the person. However, in this instance, the detectives got lucky. As soon as the DNA sample was uploaded, they received a match. The DNA belonged to 58-year-old Earl Cox, who had been in prison since 2003. Cox was not on police radar in connection with Angie's case, but he had a significant criminal record. His first stint in prison was in 1982, during his military service in Germany, where he worked as a part-time babysitter. However, his babysitting job ended when 4 girls accused him of sexual assault. Cox initially received an 8-year prison sentence in the United States but was released after serving only 3 years. Following his release, he relocated to St. Louis. However, his freedom was short-lived as he was arrested again 4 years later when 2 7-year-old girls accused him of sexual assault. Although the charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, but he violated his parole, resulting in an additional year in prison. After his release in 1992, Cox moved to St. Louis to live with his relatives. The following year, he allegedly abducted and murdered Angie. In 2002, Cox was arrested again, this time for operating a major online platform where users shared child abuse materials. The FBI had been investigating the platform and caught Cox in a sting operation when he attempted to meet an undercover agent posing as a 14-year-old girl. Cox had planned to make the girl his slave and had sent her money for a bus ticket. However, when he arrived at the meeting place, he was met by armed FBI agents and arrested. A search of his computer revealed over 45,000 images of child abuse, as well as evidence that he was the mastermind behind the online platform. This led to the arrest of 60 more individuals associated with the site, marking one of the largest operations against pedophiles in the country. In 2003, Cox was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, when his term ended, a judge used a legal loophole to keep him detained, citing him as a serious threat to children. He remained in prison until 2019, when his DNA sample matched the DNA sample from Angie's case. Detectives visited Cox in prison to discuss the match, but he denied any involvement and requested a lawyer. Given the strong DNA evidence against him, the police knew Cox's chances of winning in court were slim. Instead of pursuing a trial, investigators contacted Earl's lawyer with a proposal. In exchange for Cox's confession to Angie's murder, the prosecution would drop the death penalty and seek a life sentence instead. Aware of the strong evidence against him, Cox agreed to the deal. Detectives returned to the prison to hear Cox's account of the events. Although some parts of his story seemed unlikely, the crucial aspect for investigators was his admission to the murder. Cox claimed that on November 18, 1993, he was driving near his mother's and sister's neighborhood when his car broke down in the middle of the road. When he tried to examine the car, a school bus stopped, and several children got off. The children went into their homes, except for one girl, Angie. According to Cox, Angie approached him, and they briefly talked. He noticed she was cold, so he offered her a ride in his car, which she allegedly accepted. Cox then took Angie to Burger King to eat and later brought her to his home, where he claimed to have sexually assaulted her over several days. Eventually, Cox decided to get rid of Angie, taking her to the location where her body would later be found. He tied her to a tree, claiming she was still alive at that moment. Detectives were skeptical about certain parts of Cox's story. Angie was unlikely to get into a car with a stranger, given the short distance to her home. The investigators also questioned the car breakdown in Cox's story. He claimed the car stalled, but it started again when Angie approached. It's more likely that the perpetrator targeted Angie and decided to abduct her. This hypothesis seems more plausible than Cox's account. The detectives got what they needed, a confession to the murder. In August 2020, Cox was sentenced to life in prison without parole. A judge handed down the sentence. Unfortunately, Angie's mother didn't live to see justice served. She died of cancer in 2016. Angie's father, Ronald, told reporters that Cox was responsible for his wife's death and should have been tried for 2 murders. A woman's life was forever changed after the loss of her daughter. She lost all interest in life and eventually passed away. Cox's story, however, took a different turn. The prosecutor reopened a case involving the sexual abuse of 2 7-year-old girls, for which Cox had previously received a lenient sentence of 1 year in prison for violating his parole. The police reached out to one of Cox's victims, now an adult, and asked her to testify against him. Cox ultimately admitted to his crimes and was given an additional 10 years prison sentence. In court, his victim spoke out, saying that despite Cox's terrible actions, but she would go on to live a happy and fulfilling life, while Cox would spend the rest of his life in prison. Investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Candy Rogers. Candace Rogers, also known as Candy, was born on July 18, 1949, in Spokane, Washington. She was an only child in her family, and soon after she was born, her parents divorced. Despite this, Candy maintained a close relationship with her father. Her father lived in the same city, so she got to see him frequently. Candy was a bright and cheerful child who loved spending time outdoors with friends, exploring nature, and playing with her dog. She had a strong desire to join the Campfire Girls, a well-known organization that provided girls with opportunities to learn new skills, go on hikes, and form lasting friendships. In 1959, at the age of 9, Candy finally got the chance to join the Campfire Girls, and she was overjoyed. As a member of Campfire Girls, one of her responsibilities was to sell mints door-to-door in her neighborhood. The organization provided her with boxes of sweets to sell. On Friday, March 6th, Candy planned to sell mints after school. After returning home, having dinner, and playing with her dog, she packed 8 boxes of mints and set out around 4 p.m. Candy had a plan to go door-to-door in her neighborhood, offering sweets to her neighbors. To avoid duplicating efforts, she and the other girls in the area had assigned specific streets to visit. However, when Candy failed to return home by 6 p.m. as expected, her mom started to worry. As night began to fall, her mom and grandfather set out to search for her, scouring the neighborhood streets but finding no sign of Candy. Soon, some family friends and neighbors joined the search, but despite their combined efforts, no one could find any trace of Candy. At this point, her mom decided to call the police for assistance. By the time the police arrived, the streets were dark, and something might have happened to Candy. The police began their investigation by questioning the neighbors and soon discovered that Candy had only sold 1 box of mints, suggesting that something might have occurred shortly after she left her house. A resident reported, suggesting that something might have occurred shortly after she left her house. A resident reported seeing a girl matching Candy's description on a nearby street around 6:30 p.m. This was unusual, as Candy's mother had already begun searching for her by that time. Candy's grandfather had a strange experience as well, which occurred when he searched for her on the very same street. He narrowly avoided being hit by a speeding green 1953 Ford, which struck the curb. Unfortunately, he couldn't see the license plate number. The police issued a detailed description of the vehicle and initiated a search, but so far they have not been able to locate it. Later, around 9 p.m., several mint boxes were found scattered along the road near a bridge. These boxes belonged to Candy, increasing concerns for her safety. The police focused their search in this area, thoroughly searching both riverbanks and a small wooded area on either side. Despite an all-night search, Candy was not found. By morning, news of her disappearance had spread through local newspapers. And soon the case was being covered by statewide media. In 1959, child disappearances near their homes were unusual because it happened extremely rarely. The townspeople were extremely worried about this. To resolve this alarming situation, police have stepped up search work. They added mounted police, all-terrain vehicles and helicopters and military personnel to thoroughly search the area. In addition, over 1,000 volunteers joined in the massive search from both local areas and nearby cities. It became one of the most extensive search operations at the time. Despite these efforts, they still could not locate Candy. Another incident that added to the trauma of the town was when a search helicopter struck power lines and crashed. As a result, 3 of its crew members died. However, police remained dedicated and relentless, operating 24/7 on this case. With so many investigations open, officers still tried everything. Throughout the case, nearly 750 initial leads turned up. Officers closely inspected every detail. Regrettably, these investigative trails did not help discover any definitive proof about Candy's. 2 weeks after Candy's disappearance, 2 military personnel from a local base went on a hunting trip in the woods west of Spokane. They stumbled upon children's shoes on the ground, which immediately reminded them of Candy's case. Since many military members had been involved in the search, they were familiar with the details of her disappearance. The military personnel reported their discovery to the police, who then showed the shoes to Candy's grandfather for identification. He confirmed that the shoes belonged to his granddaughter. The police quickly launched a search operation in the woods. Within minutes, an officer spotted a foot protruding from the bushes and discovered Candy's body. She was found lying in the underbrush, covered with pine branches. A medical examination revealed the cause of death was strangulation, also found marks on Candy's hands and feet, indicating that she had been bound. Although no ropes were found near the body. Furthermore, the medical experts concluded that Candy had been sexually abused. During the investigation, the police found a green car seat cover near the crime scene. Additionally, a small purple stain was discovered on Candy's clothing, which smelled like grape-flavored chewing gum. However, the police were unable to establish any connection between the stain and the crime. The police searched for any possible clues to find the killer. They examined incoming tips and investigated hundreds of individuals, including neighbors, suspicious characters, and previously convicted criminals. Their attention eventually turned to a 50-year-old man named Alfred Braves. Alfred became a suspect due to unusual circumstances. He took his own life on the same day Candy's body was discovered, in his car, near where the mint boxes were found. He also lived close to Candy's home. When police found Alfred's body, they discovered a rope and woman's hair pins in his car. After searching Alfred's house, police found numerous newspapers about sexual crimes against women and girls. They also learned that several women had accused him of harassment, and his wife suspected him of Candy's murder. However, investigators were unable to find any evidence directly linking Alfred to Candy's murder. Despite their reluctance, detectives had to eliminate him from the suspect list, as they did not have enough evidence to prove his guilt. As a result, they began investigating other suspects. Several months after the murder, the police had compiled an extensive list of suspects, but despite their diligent efforts, the investigation has made no new progress. Later, the investigators turned their attention to a new suspect, a serial killer named Hugh Morse. Hugh was arrested in 1961 for a string of crimes, and two factors made him a person of interest in Candy's case. Firstly, he was known for constantly chewing grape-flavored gum, which was similar to a substance found on Candy's clothing. Additionally, Hugh had killed two women in Spokane just a few months after Candy's death. Hugh's history of violence was also a concern. His first arrest was for assaulting a woman, but he received no serious consequences, merely being discharged from the army, where he was serving at the time. Hugh committed a string of robberies in Los Angeles, but only served 6 months in jail. After his release, he lured two 8-year-old girls to a secluded area with the promise of ice cream and then sexually assaulted them. Despite being arrested again, he managed to avoid prison time. A medical commission evaluated him and deemed him a sexual psychopath, leading to his placement in a mental health facility. 2 years later, doctors believed he was cured and released him from the facility. Hugh then moved to Spokane, where he began spying on women through their windows. In November 1959, Hugh broke into the home of a 28-year-old woman, assaulted her, and ultimately killed her. 10 months later, he entered the residence of a 69-year-old woman and repeated the same violent actions. A month after that, he attacked another woman, stabbing her multiple times, but she survived the assault. Hugh continued to travel from city to city, committing numerous crimes, including attacking women and girls with a knife, sexually assaulting them, and killing 2 more victims. His crimes eventually caught the attention of the FBI, and he was added to the list of the country's 10 most wanted criminals. He was eventually captured and sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. While serving his sentence, Hugh attempted to take his own life, but was saved by the prison guards and continued to serve out his sentence. Detectives investigating Candy's case visited him in prison multiple times, but he consistently denied any involvement in the crime. A polygraph test was also administered, which suggested he was telling the truth. However, lie detector test results are not considered reliable because their accuracy is only relative. Despite the lack of evidence, but investigators initially considered Hugh a primary suspect. Due to his background and the fact that he lived in Spokane at the time of the murder. However, he continued to deny any involvement and police were unable to find any evidence to prove his involvement in the crime. The investigation then shifted focus to another suspect, 49-year-old Howard Barnett. He was arrested in February 1960 on suspicion of molesting a minor girl. Before taking his own life in his cell at the Spokane police station, Barnett wrote a cryptic message in his own blood on the wall, stating, "I have a sin before the Lord." Detectives then began investigating Barnett's potential involvement in the crime, but they were once again unable to find any evidence of his guilt. Howard remained a primary suspect in the case due to his proximity to Candy's residence. Despite years of investigation, police continued to follow new leads and examine other potential suspects. A woman eventually came forward claiming to have seen a green car following Candy on the day she disappeared. Police refocused on locating the vehicle, but this lead ultimately yielded no results. It was notable that the woman waited many years to share this information. The case was reopened at various times, but each time investigators reached a dead end. Throughout the investigation, police not only had to pursue new leads but also had to verify the validity of confessions. 13 people gave false confessions to the crime. However, none of them were able to provide specific details that only the actual killer would have known. Instead, they often repeated details previously reported in the media. High-profile cases often exhibit unexpected and surprising behaviors, such as false confessions. In the case of Candy's murder, numerous detectives worked on the case over time, but none were able to solve it. This crime stood out as one of the most prominent and mysterious in the city and state. Before the murder, parents felt safe letting their children play outside, but the case led many to reconsider their views on safety. Years later, in the early 2000s, the case was reopened, and a new detective decided to use modern technologies to re-examine the evidence. Fortunately, the police had carefully collected and preserved the evidence in 1959, including a sample of male semen on Candy's clothing. Despite being stored for decades, experts were able to re-examine the sample, although it extremely challenging due to its age. After a lengthy investigation, experts finally extracted a DNA profile from the evidence and uploaded it to the FBI database. However, a search of the database yielded no matches. Further cross-examination of the profile with numerous suspect samples also proved unsuccessful. For many years, suspicion fell on Hugh Morse, but forensic evidence revealed no link between him and the crime. This lack of progress brought the investigation to a halt once again. Although the police had the killer's DNA, they struggled to identify the perpetrator. In 2021, a new detective reopened the case and decided to employ a new approach: genetic genealogy. This innovative method had already solved numerous cold cases and offered hope for finally resolving the standing mystery surrounding Candy's murder. The detective reached out to multiple labs that specialized in this type of analysis but was met with disappointment once again. To use this method, experts needed the original DNA sample, which was a challenge. Several labs attempted to work with the semen sample, but each concluded that it had degraded too much, making it impossible to extract the necessary information. The detective then consulted the final lab, which led to a long-awaited important discovery. With the help of state-of-the-art tools, the experts were able to successfully analyze the sample and obtain the perpetrator's DNA profile. This profile is then uploaded to a genealogy database to begin searching for the DNA owner's relatives. After a thorough investigation involving thousands of individuals, researchers pinpointed one family as the likely source of the DNA sample. They discovered that the DNA probably belonged to one of 3 brothers, all of whom had passed away. However, the team found that one brother had a daughter, and the police reached out to her for assistance. The daughter was shocked by the possibility that her father might be the killer, but she immediately agreed to help. She provided a DNA sample, proving that she was closely related to the person whose semen was found on Candy's clothing. With this new information, detectives obtained a court order to exhume her father's remains. A DNA profile extracted from the remains revealed a complete match with the DNA found on Candy's clothing, identifying the killer as John Hoff, 62 years after the crime. Hoff had never been a suspect despite hundreds of others being investigated over the years. Detectives investigating Hoff's biography uncovered his involvement in multiple crimes. At the time of Candy's murder, Hoff was 20 years old and lived close to her house, less than a mile away. He was also a soldier in the army, stationed at a nearby base, where Candy's body was found. 2 years after the murder, Hoff attacked another woman, binding and sexually assaulting her before attempting to kill her. However, the woman survived the attack. Following his arrest, Hoff received a 6-month prison sentence and was dishonorably discharged from the army. After his release, Hoff started a family, having 2 sons and 2 daughters, and he living an ordinary life. He changed jobs several times and at one point, suffered a severe chemical burn to his face while working at a food packaging plant, leaving a scar to his face. Hoff's life ended in June 1970, 11 years after Candy's murder, when he took his own life without leaving a note. Further investigation revealed that Candy might have known Hoff, as she was friends with his 10-year-old sister at the time. Years later, Hoff's sister told detectives that she had cried in Hoff's arms after Candy's murder, unaware that he was the one responsible for Candy's death. Candy's parents did not live to see the day when the killer's identity was revealed. Her mother passed away in 2006, and her father had taken his own life in 1963, 4 years after the tragedy. The reason behind his death remains a mystery. There is speculation that he was unable to cope with the loss of his daughter. Despite this, the case was eventually solved, marking one of the longest investigations in history, spanning over 62 years and involving multiple detectives across different generations. At the press conference, where the killer's name was announced, only one officer who had worked on the case in 1959 was present. He expressed gratitude for having lived long enough to learn the truth. Hoff's daughter initially struggled to accept that her father had committed such a horrific crime. However, she eventually came to terms with the fact, referring to her father as a monster who took an innocent life. She expressed regret that he was not held accountable during his lifetime. A chilling coincidence is that Hoff took his own life when his daughter was 9 years old, the same age as Candy was when she was killed. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Gretchen Harrington. Gretchen Harrington was born on June 13, 1967, in Pennsylvania. She was the youngest of 3 sisters, and her family moved to the small town of Brawl shortly after her birth. Gretchen's father, a pastor, took a job at the local church, and Gretchen quickly grew to love the town. She spent much of her free time outdoors with her sisters and friends. Brawl was a safe community where parents felt comfortable letting their children play outside until dark. As a member of a devoutly religious family, Gretchen spent much time at her father's church and excelled in Sunday school, always getting top grades. On August 15, 1975, Gretchen's family was eagerly awaiting the return of her mother and newborn sister from the hospital. Gretchen wanted to be home to greet them, but her father encouraged her to attend Sunday school to keep up her grades. Gretchen reluctantly agreed to go to church and set off with her Bible. Her older sisters, who usually walked with her, stayed home that morning. However, Gretchen wasn't worried about the short 8-minute walk to church. Sunday school is divided into 2 sessions. The first session takes place at Trinity Church and lasts an hour and a half. After that, some of the children go to Father Gretchen's church. But when the children arrived at the second church at 11:30 a.m., Gretchen's father noticed that his daughter was not there. He assumed she might be at the first church, so he called to check. The pastor's wife answered, informing him that Gretchen was not there. She then told her husband, David, who was a Sunday school teacher. He was surprised by the news, since Gretchen had not attended his class that morning. Gretchen's father became worried when he couldn't find her. He asked David to contact the police and started searching the area between the churches and nearby streets, but she was nowhere to be found. He also reached out to the parents of her friends, but they were either at church or home. Her best friend, who was also David's daughter, hadn't seen her all day. As news of Gretchen's disappearance spread, the police quickly launched a search operation. Hundreds of volunteers joined in, many of whom knew Gretchen's father from his church. Together, they searched the entire town, then moved on to wooded areas and the riverbank. A police helicopter was also deployed to scan the area from above. The search continued through the night, but to no avail. The next day, more volunteers joined in. Police posted flyers with Gretchen's photo and information about her disappearance along the roads. Despite their efforts, police were unable to find Gretchen. After several days of searching, no significant clues were found and Gretchen's fate remains a mystery. The town is known for its safe environment, where children are often allowed to play outside freely without adult supervision from a young age. However, this sense of security is no longer there when Gretchen goes missing. Some people thought she might have run away from home, while others believed she had gone swimming in the river and drowned. However, the most alarming theory was that she had been abducted by someone. As a result, parents became extremely cautious and stopped letting their children go out alone. Police interviewed bystanders. They gathered some clues. One witness reported seeing a girl who looked like Gretchen near the church on the morning she went missing. According to the witness, a green sedan approached the girl, but the witness did not see what happened next. Another person shared a similar story, but this time described a white Cadillac approaching the girl. Police checked the owners of cars matching the description in the area. 4 days later, detectives received a new lead. A resident of Westchester, a town 30 minutes from Brawl, contacted police and reported finding children's shorts matching the description of Gretchen's clothing. Police immediately showed Gretchen's mother the shorts, but she confirmed that they did not belong to her daughter. The investigation into Gretchen's disappearance had stalled, with no progress made for several weeks. As a result, the police halted their search operation and shifted their focus to gathering more information. They continued to interview witnesses, but with each passing day, their hopes of finding Gretchen alive began to dwindle. Until October 14th, when police received a phone call. A jogger was running in a large national park, about 20 minutes from Brawl, when he stumbled upon a body. The jogger immediately alerted park rangers, who then notified the police. Upon arriving at the scene, police quickly determined that the body was that of a child. However, due to the severe state of decomposition, identification of the child was extremely difficult. Police suspected that Gretchen might be the victim, so they showed her parents the clothes found on her body. Gretchen's mother quickly identified them as her daughters because she had sewn them herself. Forensic experts later confirmed that the body was Gretchen's by comparing them to her dental records. They also determined that she had died from severe head trauma. Because the body was so badly decomposed, police were unable to gather further information, including whether Gretchen had been sexually assaulted. Additionally, DNA analysis was not available in 1975, leaving police without any further leads. News of the murder sparked renewed interest in the case, and police received numerous tips from the community. The investigation into Gretchen's death turned up no leads. Police screened nearby residents with a history of violent crime, but nothing came up. Months later, the case had made no progress. Over the years, the case was reopened periodically, and the police reviewed the available information. However, each time, the investigation yielded no new evidence. Even applying DNA analysis was of no help in this case, as no foreign DNA was found on Gretchen's body or clothing. The case of Gretchen's murder went unsolved for decades, occasionally resurfacing in newspapers and on television. However, it wasn't until recent years that the case regained widespread public attention. Two local journalists, Joanna and Mike, decided to write a book about the crime, dedicating several years to gathering information. As children, both Joanna and Mike grew up in the same town as Gretchen. Joanna, who was only 9 years old when the crime occurred, the town had changed forever, and children were no longer allowed to roam freely. Leave home unsupervised. This fear lasted for years, leaving a lasting impression on the townspeople, the memory of Gretchen's murder still fresh in their minds. To write their book, Joanna and Mike had access to the case files and interviewed individuals involved in the investigation. By carefully piecing together the events surrounding Gretchen's disappearance, they were able to reconstruct the entire story. The book, released in 2022, brought attention to Gretchen's case. Months later, a woman contacted police about Gretchen. The woman said she was 10 years old at the time of the murder and lived in Havertone, near Gretchen's home. She was friends with Gretchen and her sisters, as well as many other kids in the area. She often slept over at friends' houses, and one night, while she was at her sister's house, she woke up in the middle of the night feeling someone touching her. When she opened her eyes, she saw their father standing in front of her, who quickly left. The next day, she stayed another night. Her friend's dad continued to come into her bedroom and started touching her. The next morning, she finally told one of her sisters about what happened to her. She was surprised that it happened quite often with her friends. When the woman returned home, she shared her entire story with her parents. However, instead of going to the authorities, they banned her from ever going to her friend's house again. This was just a week before Gretchen went missing. The woman eventually revealed the identity of the man involved in her story, David Zandstra, the same pastor who taught at Sunday school. She also shared that a month after Gretchen went missing, one of her friends told her about the incident, that a man had tried to kidnap her. The girl refused to get into his car and later confided to her friends that the real culprit was David Zandstra. The woman provided her personal diary as evidence of the information provided. In her diary entry on September 15, 1975, she documented her friend's request to keep the encounter secret due to fears of potential harm from David Zandstra. Upon receiving this new information, the police immediately reopened the investigation into Gretchen's disappearance. While reviewing the case files, detectives discovered several suspicious factors that indirectly implicated David Zandstra. It was David Zandstra who reported Gretchen missing to the police, providing investigators with a detailed description of her clothing: dark blue zip-up shorts with front buttons and pockets without zippers or buttons, and a white shirt with braided hair. However, he mentioned that he had not seen Gretchen that day, raising questions about how he knew what she was wearing. His description was later confirmed by the discovery of her body, dressed exactly as he had described. Police closely examined David, the man who taught Sunday school at Gretchen's father's church. David initially claimed he had not seen Gretchen on the morning of her disappearance. However, David's alibi gave him enough time to kidnap Gretchen, kill her, dump her body in the park, and return to the church to teach. The investigation revealed that David and his family had moved to another state just months after Gretchen went missing. This sudden move, combined with David's ownership of a green scooter, attracted the attention of the police. The police decided to question David, who was now 83 years old and living in Georgia. On July 17, 2023, they began questioning David. As the conversation progressed, David realized that the police suspected him of murder. In response, he denied all accusations and asked what evidence they had against him. David was confronted with incriminating evidence, including a woman's testimony about his inappropriate behavior at a sleepover and allegations of molesting his own daughter. When he learned that his secret had been exposed, David's demeanor changed. After 48 years of silence, he finally began to talk about the murder. According to David, on the morning of the murder, he drove his green American motor station wagon to the church where Gretchen's father was the pastor. He saw Gretchen leave the house and waited until no one was around before approaching her. He offered her a ride, and she agreed. However, instead of taking Gretchen to the church, David drove her to a secluded park area. He stopped the car and instructed her to undress, but Gretchen refused and asked to go home. In response, David struck her several times on the head, causing her to lose consciousness. He then removed her clothes and committed the crime before driving her to another park. He carried her body into the bushes and concealed it with branches. David then returned to the church to begin his classes. When David confessed to the crime, the police arrested him for Gretchen's murder. David went to Pennsylvania, where he was held pending trial. David's work held a respectable position in society, which protected him from suspicion. However, After the truth finally came to light, the police obtained a DNA sample and began comparing it with DNA from other unsolved cases. They also investigated the disappearances of young girls in the cities where he worked. Police have linked David to the disappearance of 4-year-old Amanda Campbell from California, who went missing in 1991. The case resembles Gretchen's. At the time, David Zandstra was a pastor in that same neighborhood. The police currently have no concrete evidence against David, but they have found similarities between the various cases and Gretchen's kidnapping. Therefore, they are investigating David as the possible perpetrator of the cases. The trial for Gretchen's murder has not yet begun. David's attorney is trying to delay the process and advise him to withdraw his confession. If this happens, the trial could drag on for years, and given his advanced age, David may not live. Detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Victoria Nazirova. Olga Tsvyk, a 35-year-old Ukrainian immigrant eyelash artist, reported a robbery at her home. The incident occurred on September 2, 2016. Olga Tsvyk called the police after discovering that several valuables had been stolen from her bedroom. When the police arrived at the scene, Olga Tsvyk explained that she had gone to the hospital earlier due to severe dizziness and nausea. To investigate the circumstances surrounding the incident, the police conducted a detailed interview with Olga Tsvyk. During the interview, she recalled a recent unpleasant encounter with a client named Victoria Narova, who had come to her home to request urgent eyelash extensions. When Victoria came to Olga Tsvyk's home to request urgent eyelash extensions, Olga Tsvyk told Victoria that she only did eyelash extensions in the salon and did not take clients at home. However, explaining to Victoria was useless, and Olga Tsvyk had to agree to take her in. During the investigation, it was discovered that Victoria had come to Olga Tsvyk's apartment, bringing 3 slices of cheesecake from a famous local bakery. Victoria enjoyed 2 slices and insisted that Olga Tsvyk eat the 3rd slice. After drinking tea and eating the cheesecake, Olga Tsvyk began to feel unwell. After Victoria left, Olga Tsvyk suffered from severe nausea, eventually passing out for about 30 minutes. After regaining consciousness, Olga Tsvyk called an ambulance and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. However, medical tests found nothing unusual in her blood. When Olga Tsvyk returned home, she discovered that several valuables were missing and reported the theft to the police. The police found Olga Tsvyk listless and looking unwell. The police suspected that Olga Tsvyk was under the influence of drugs and had made up the story. Despite the police's suspicions, Olga Tsvyk maintained that she had not taken any medication, and Olga Tsvyk believed that the cheesecake she had eaten was the cause of her condition. Possibly poisoning. When searching the scene, police discovered a box of cookies from a local store in the trash, which Olga Tsvyk identified as the packaging for the cheesecake Victoria had brought. Police collected the remaining baking residue from the cheesecake, which was taken for in-room analysis to determine whether the cheesecake was the cause of Olga Tsvyk's health problems, but the forensic examination revealed nothing suspicious. Despite this, Olga Tsvyk insisted that the cheesecake was the cause of her condition. Olga Tsvyk mentioned that she had been to the hospital and that doctors had examined her body when she was admitted, and the police had contacted the medical facility to ask about Olga Tsvyk's condition and the test results. However, the doctors refused to provide information, citing patient confidentiality. The police considered this a reason not to believe Olga Tsvyk. The customer that Olga Tsvyk had told them about could not be found, so the case was adjourned. These details were told by a neighbor who the very next day noticed a suspicious woman at Olga's apartment. This woman came and went several times, hanging around the beauty master's apartment until she came face to face with her neighbor. The strange woman said that her friend Olga was sick and hurriedly left the house. The neighbor saw that the door to Olga's apartment was open and looked in to check on her. It was unbearably stuffy in the victim's apartment. The heating was on full blast despite the 30-degree summer heat. Olga was alive, but she was unconscious. She was lying on her bed, but she was wearing an unusual combination of clothes, revealing underwear and warm sports pants. When the detectives heard about this, they had the feeling that someone was deliberately trying to change the victim's clothes. Scattered around Olga were pills containing a powerful drug. It looked as if Olga had taken the pills with the intention of taking her own life. A neighbor immediately notified 911, describing the strange woman as dark-haired, attractive-looking, and very similar to Olga. After learning new details, investigators became convinced that the doppelganger woman was not a figment of Olga's imagination. Then the detectives took up the case more actively. Everything they saw in the apartment seemed to be a description of a crime scene they wanted to frame as a voluntary demise. Detectives believed that the persistent cheesecake customer named Victoria Narova was involved. The police began searching for Victoria, but they had no leads, no information about who she was, or her photograph. Later, however, the department was approached by a private detective, a former police officer who had long been following the con artist's violent activities. He had already tracked Victoria online, where she advertised escort services on a dating site and through social media. The private investigator believed that the woman used online promotion to find victims for her crimes, and the scheme worked perfectly. Victoria would arrive at the home of the next client, then she would drug the person with psychoactive substances so that they would lose consciousness. After that, she would take everything of value and then go into hiding. This activity could have been concealed indefinitely if not for this tragic circumstance. Meanwhile, Alsvik finally recovered from the unpleasant events. Then, having discharged from the hospital, she shared on her page in social networks the story of poisoning. After that, one of her clients unexpectedly told that she knew a man named Ruben Barakov who was in a similar story. Ruben was the owner of a dry cleaner, and the man met Victoria Nazarova on a Russian dating site about a couple of months before Olga's cheesecake poisoning. The new acquaintance invited Ruben to her home and boasted that she was a very good cook. He agreed and came to her place, but as soon as he tasted the dishes, the man lost consciousness. The friend emptied his pockets, took expensive watches, money, and cards. The man was under the influence of a very strong psychoactive substance and sincerely believes that it almost killed him. Later, when he began to regain consciousness, Victoria took him to the dry cleaners, gave him to his colleagues, and told them that he was drunk and then left. From there, only then did Ruben realize that he had been robbed. The private investigator assumed the situation was much more serious, and the two victims of the poisoner were very lucky. In 2017, he worked with a client from Russia to help track down an elusive criminal. Nadia Ford turned to the private detective after the disappearance of her own mother, Alla Alexenko. The girl herself lived in New York, USA, but was born in Russia. Nadia was originally from Kotor. Her mother, Alla Enko, single-handedly brought up her daughter and son, and she had a hard time. She worked 5 jobs to provide for her children. Nadia dreamed of living in the USA since childhood, and her dream came true when the girl came to study in America in 2007. There, she met a guy whom she married and took his surname, Ford. But the marriage did not work out, and the spouse is divorced. Nadia stayed to live in the United States and successfully settled there. She maintained close relations with her mother, who at that time was left alone. Years later, Alla Alexenko went missing in Russia, and Nadia hired a private investigator to find her mother, Alla Alexenko, in 2017. In an effort to find her, Nadia hired a private investigator, who discovered that Victoria had rented a car on the day her mother went missing. The investigator looked into the car's information and found surveillance footage from October 5, 2014. The footage showed the car driving on the highway with two people inside, the driver, Victoria, and a motionless woman in the front passenger seat who looked like the missing 54-year-old Alla Alexenko. Nadia believed that the woman in the footage was her mother. Nadia went to the police, who verified that Victoria had indeed rented the car. As a result, the police summoned Victoria for questioning. During an interview with Victoria, she revealed that she had indeed driven the rental car involved on October 5, but said she was alone. Victoria agreed to take a lie detector test. Victoria was released pending the results, but later it turned out that Victoria failed a lie detector test and became the prime suspect in the case. Before the police could arrest her, Victoria took advantage of the opportunity, quickly fleeing the country on the first available flight. Meanwhile, the police expanded the search for the missing Alla Alexenko. Nadia actively participated in the investigation for 6 months, holding out hope that her mother was still alive. During the investigation, the police followed the route of the rented car, which led them to a forest near Victoria's hometown of Armavir. Upon reaching the forest, the police discovered a body about 3 hours away from Alla Alexenko's residence. The body was so badly burned that it was unrecognizable. Nadia identified her mother's body by her teeth. Despite a thorough investigation, the cause of Alla Alexenko's death has not been found. The police issued an arrest warrant for Victoria Nazirova and sent it to Interpol. However, Victoria escaped for a long time. Nadia returned to the United States after attending her mother's funeral in Kodar. For a long time, Nadia struggled to overcome the pain of losing her loved one. Finally, Nadia regained her health and vowed to her mother that she would pursue justice and hold the killer responsible for her mother's death accountable. One day, while surfing the internet, Nadia came across a post on social media. Victoria Nazirova, the prime suspect in her mother's death, was living a lavish life in Mexico, seemingly unconcerned about her wanted status. Nadia informed the U.S. police about Victoria's whereabouts and the police began an investigation. Nadia then hired a top U.S. private investigator to speed up the investigation. A wealthy friend of Nadia's paid for the detective services, as Nadia could not afford them. At the time, Nadia had been unemployed for months due to her search for her mother. The private investigator analyzed Victoria's social media photos, including recent posts by Victoria. The investigator discovered that Victoria was in the United States. In one selfie, the sunglasses reflected the dashboard of a car. After examining several models, the investigator identified the car as a Chrysler 300. Detectives successfully tracked recent photos of Victoria to the Russian neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. By checking a database of similar cars in the area, police were able to narrow down the search and identify the culprit. Despite the challenges, police located Victoria and discovered that she lived with her boyfriend in a complex where the Chrysler was registered in his name. Unaware that Interpol was searching for her worldwide, Victoria posted the photos online without hesitation. Detectives identified Victoria's boyfriend and contacted him. It turned out that the boyfriend had been poisoned by Victoria and was seeking help. Furthermore, Victoria had poisoned her boyfriend's beagle, causing the dog to die. On March 20, 2017, 41-year-old Victoria Nazirova was finally found and arrested. Nadia, the private investigator, and the police were able to breathe a sigh of relief. Leaving Victoria at large posed a significant threat as she had the potential to harm many more people. When searching Victoria's apartment, the police discovered Olga Tsbyk's identity card. Victoria's main motive for targeting Olga Tsbyk was not only her desire for money and valuables, but Victoria also wanted a passport. Victoria's temporary visa was about to expire and she needed a new ID card to stay in the country and avoid being tried in Russia. The face on Olga Tsbyka's passport bore a strong resemblance to Victoria's. The police suspected that Victoria intended to kill Olga Tsbyk and take her identity. Fortunately, Olga Tsbyka's neighbor intervened, saving her life. When they further examined the poisoned cheesecake in the laboratory, they discovered a banned sedative, which Victoria had added to the cake. The investigation revealed that Victoria had used this sedative to carry out her plot. Victoria would increase the dosage to make the victim unconscious. Olga Tsbyk was lucky to survive the incident. The unusually high temperature in her apartment was not accidental. Victoria deliberately increased the temperature to increase the effect of the sedative, which could have been fatal. Victoria clearly knew the situation in advance. To avoid suspicion, Victoria tried to cover her tracks by increasing the temperature in the house and dressing Olga Tsbyk in warm clothes. After her arrest, Victoria denied all charges, including her involvement in the disappearance and murder of Nadia's mother, as well as the intentional murder of Olga Tsbyk and the other victims. Police said Victoria was a suspect in the theft of 2 fur coats in May 2016, but the case was never solved. After several other incidents, it emerged that Victoria had been involved in the thefts, meeting men online, going to their homes, giving them drugs and stealing from them. Most of the men did not go to the police for fear of publicity. And Victoria escaped conviction. The trial was postponed for about 6 years due to the pandemic and the lengthy preparation of the case file. The case finally went to trial in January 2023, attracting media and public attention. Throughout the trial, Victoria remained silent. The court was forbidden from going into details about Alla Alexenko's death because the crime was committed in another country. Victoria's defense attorney said that there was no direct evidence or testimony linking Victoria to the crime, specifically the poisoning of the cheesecake and forcing Olga Tsbyk to eat it. According to Olga Tsbyk's testimony, Victoria brought 3 pieces of cheesecake to Olga Tsbyk's apartment, ate 2 in front of Olga Tsbyk, and then Olga Tsbyk ate the 3rd piece without hesitation. The prosecution argued that it was not an accident and that Victoria had deliberately added the drug to only 1 slice of the cake, knowing which one it was, and tricked Olga Tsbyk by eating the other 2 slices. After a thorough review of the case, the jury found Victoria Nazirova guilty of second-degree intentional homicide. Although the maximum sentence for this crime was 25 years in prison, the judge reduced the sentence to 21 years. However, by law, Victoria would be eligible for parole after 15 years in prison. Victoria Nazirova had been a sophisticated and stylish woman, but her life changed completely when she was sentenced to prison. The harsh realities of prison life took their toll on Victoria, with inadequate and poor nutrition. A fight in prison left Victoria severely injured, almost losing her sight. Victoria took the prison to court, filing a lawsuit against the prison for negligence on the part of the guards who failed to assist during the violent incident. The case was eventually settled out of court, with Victoria receiving $325,000 in damages. In an interview from prison, Victoria maintained her innocence, denying the charges related to the crimes she committed. Victoria will serve the remainder of her sentence in a U.S. prison before being deported to Russia, where she will stand trial for her alleged involvement in the murder of Alla Alexenko. Alla Alexenko's daughter Nadia has expressed relief that Victoria is facing justice for her actions and will no longer be able to escape punishment. Lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Kelly Dwyer. Kelly Dwyer was born in 1986 in Lincolnshire, a suburb of Chicago. Her parents divorced when she was 16, but they remained close to her. The divorce had a significant impact on Kelly's life. A year after her parents' divorce, Kelly graduated from high school without a clear plan for her future. To delay her decision to go to college, she worked part-time at a local restaurant. 6 years later, in 2008, Kelly, then 22, moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to start afresh. She enrolled in college, became a yoga instructor, and found a job as a saleswoman to cover her living expenses. She also worked as a nanny to earn extra income. Kelly often visited trendy places around town, creating memorable experiences. When she met her father a month ago, she was living in Milwaukee, and her life was going well. At that time, Kelly was a successful yoga instructor and a popular employee at a sports store. Kelly seemed content with her life, enjoying her job and a year-long relationship with Chris Zacco, a 38-year-old IT manager for a transportation company. Chris had graduated from Boston University in 2009 with a degree in international business and had moved from New York City to Milwaukee for work. He was a hardworking, decent man from a good family who shared Kelly's interests in sports and entertainment. Kelly and Chris seemed to get along well. Chris had built a successful career, owned a luxury apartment, an expensive car, and a large fortune that he had earned himself. Kelly's father approved of him, seeing him as a great match for his daughter. On October 12, 2013, Kelly was nowhere to be seen at work. She was well liked for her punctuality and work ethic, so this struck everyone as odd. Her colleagues tried to contact her, but her cell phone was silent. She was also inactive on social media. Kelly had never left her phone behind before. She simply disappeared, and her loved ones contacted the police to file a missing persons report. However, during the investigation into Kelly's disappearance, detectives found no evidence of enemies or individuals who might want to harm her. All of her belongings were still at home, so police ruled out the possibility that she left voluntarily. What was concerning was that her bank account, phone, and other accounts had no activity. Police suspected that Kelly was in trouble. Since Chris was the last person to see her on October 10, 2013, investigators brought him in for questioning. Chris stated that he and Kelly spent time at his apartment in Lafayette Towers, then went to a nearby bar, socialized, and drank. They returned to his apartment around 2:30 a.m., had a good time, and went to bed. At 9 a.m., Kelly left Chris's apartment, and they never saw each other again. Chris insisted that Kelly was not his girlfriend, saying they had an open relationship. He also revealed that he was in love with someone else and had plans for a future with her. This raised suspicions among investigators, who found Chris's story plausible but noted inconsistencies in his words and actions. To investigate further, detectives interviewed friends who had been with Kelly and Chris the night before Kelly went missing. These friends confirmed that the group had a good time at a bar and then ordered pizza, eating it on a bench outside. Kelly seemed to be in a good mood, sharing her plans for the next day, which included sleeping in, doing yoga, doing laundry, and relaxing. Chris and Kelly left for his apartment that night, where they met another friend who had been invited over for drinks. This friend reported feeling uncomfortable in Chris's apartment because she sensed tension between Chris and Kelly. She recalled that Chris was smoking and chatting with her while Kelly seemed upset. Assuming that Kelly was just tired, the friend thought little of it and left the apartment. However, after talking to Kelly's other friends, investigators discovered that Chris and Kelly were not on good terms. Kelly loves Chris very much. But unfortunately, Chris seems uninterested in their relationship. Chris does not make any long-term plans involving Kelly, which worries her. Kelly's friend, missing, suspects that Chris is being unfaithful and that their relationship will not last. As a result, Kelly loses hope for a future with Chris and begins to look for other options. She creates a profile on a dating website and starts chatting with various men, but she has yet to meet any of them in real life. Kelly's intention is to have a backup plan in case things do not work out with Chris. Additionally, her friends notice bruises on Kelly's arms and neck and ask her about them, but Kelly dismisses their concerns by downplaying the situation. Her friends suspect that the bruises may be a sign of domestic violence, but Kelly never confirms their suspicions. Meanwhile, investigators analyzed security footage from Chris's home. The footage showed Kelly and Chris coming home drunk one night, but Kelly was never seen leaving the apartment. This contradicted Chris's testimony that Kelly left his home at 9 a.m. the next morning. It was later discovered that another friend of Chris's was at the apartment that night and admitted to using illegal drugs with Chris. Detectives obtained a search warrant for Chris's apartment and found numerous drugs, pills, pipes, and other paraphernalia, leading to Chris's arrest for possession. They also discovered a torn shower curtain that appeared to have been forcefully removed. During questioning, Chris remained calm and admitted to using drugs but denied distributing them. A search of his cell phone revealed disturbing content, including photos of an unconscious girl in bed and a video of Chris raping the girl, who appeared to have been strangled. This led to suspicions that Chris had drugged and exploited her. Evidence from Chris's phone was linked to Kelly's disappearance. Police returned to Chris's apartment with a dog, which responded to the bed and bathroom area before leading them to the front door. The dog then guided police to Chris's car in the parking lot and to a nearby dumpster. The investigation reached a critical stage when investigators believed Kelly had been murdered. Kelly's boyfriend, Chris, became the prime suspect, as evidence suggested he was the last person to see her alive. It is believed that he spent time with Kelly in his apartment before secretly moving her body into his car, a plan that would have escaped the building's 28 surveillance cameras. During the investigation, police analyzed Chris's computer and discovered child pornography. This led to Chris being charged with possession of the images, but he was released on bail and is awaiting trial. The investigation continues as authorities attempt to find Kelly's body and gather enough evidence to build a stronger case against Chris. It should be noted that Chris had claimed to be in a long-term relationship with a woman, and investigators quickly began gathering information about that woman. The investigation uncovered the identity of a woman named Megan, with whom Chris had been secretly in a 3-year relationship, unbeknownst to Kelly, similar to the relationship he had with Kelly. Police came to interview Megan and showed her photos of Chris' apartment. After a thorough inspection, Megan found several items missing, including a shower curtain in the bathroom, a rug, several towels, and the large golf bag that was usually kept in the bedroom. Detectives believe Kelly could fit in the large bag Megan reported missing. After examining the building's entrances and exits, police found a side path that Chris could have taken to get to his car without being seen by surveillance cameras. Reviewing footage from the parking lot cameras, Chris was seen arriving at the house with the large bag, which he placed in the trunk of his car. At 10:06 a.m. on October 11th, Chris left the house in his car. Just 2 minutes later, at 10:08 a.m., Kelly's phone lost connection at the same location. Over the next 8 hours, footage captured Chris making multiple trips between his home and his car, loading up on belongings, before leaving for good at 6:16 p.m. Chris did not return home until the next day. When investigators asked him what he had been doing the previous day, he said he was moving his summer sports gear to his mother's house. However, no one found this explanation credible. Chris was supposed to meet Megan at 7:30 that evening, but he arrived more than an hour late. Detectives suspected that he was looking for a place to dispose of Kelly's body, which would explain his delay. Unfortunately, they were unable to track his movements because his phone had been turned off since the morning. As an IT expert, Chris would have known that his phone records could be used to track him. Megan reported that Chris seemed very strange that night. He appeared restless and anxious, and he said that his phone was not working, which was why he was late. After the date, Megan and Chris went to Megan's apartment, where they spent the night. According to Megan, Chris was extremely stressed, had not slept at all, and was sweating so much that she had to change the sheets in the morning. Investigators believe that Chris was worried because he still had Kelly's body in the trunk of his car and was afraid of being discovered. He was trying to find a place to hide her body. On the morning of October 12th, Chris said goodbye to Megan and left after trying to convince her to temporarily move to Denver, but she refused. Police tracked Chris's location history using his car's GPS, which led them to a cheese shop called Cheese House, 80 miles from Milwaukee. However, it seemed unlikely that Chris would have driven that far just to buy cheese. Chris claimed that he had bought cheese for his parents, presenting a receipt for the cheese at 9:55 a.m. on October 12th, which his parents confirmed. However, the police found it difficult to believe Chris's story, as the same cheese could easily be purchased at a nearby supermarket. They suspected that Chris might have dumped Kelly's body in the area around the cheese store. Further investigation revealed that on his way back, Chris stopped at a sports store and bought new sneakers that afternoon. Detectives suspected that Chris had deliberately discarded his old shoes, possibly to avoid leaving blood or footprints that could be linked to the crime scene. It appeared that he had carefully planned to destroy evidence and create an alibi for himself. Chris, with his analytical mind, had tried to commit the perfect crime. However, investigators were able to spot inconsistencies in his story. Notably, it took him over 2 hours to travel from the cheese house to the sports store, a distance of about 80 kilometers, when it would normally take only an hour. This significant time difference suggests that Chris spent an additional hour on another activity, possibly hiding the body. Police speculate that he may have dumped the body along the way. However, the exact location of the body remains unknown. With a large search area spanning 50 miles, finding the body proved to be a huge challenge. A roadside search eventually led to a discovery. In a wooded area approximately 37 miles from the city, a local resident found human remains while walking. Upon discovery, the resident immediately contacted the sheriff's office. Dental records confirmed the remains were those of Kelly Dwyer. This discovery finally ended Kelly's parents' long and agonizing search for their daughter. The next step was to secure justice by determining the exact cause of her death. Based on available information, the medical examiner believed she may have been strangled but not forcefully enough to fracture the hyoid bone. There was no direct evidence at the scene where Kelly's body was discovered, such as torn curtains, mats, towels, or bags. However, the position of the skeleton provided valuable insight. The body was found face down, with one arm trapped underneath and the legs bent in a way that suggested it had been hidden for some time after death. This finding further supported the theory that Kelly's body had been hidden in a golf bag. As evidenced by footage of Chris holding the bag and driving into the area where the body was discovered. While these findings were compelling, they were circumstantial and did not directly implicate Chris in Kelly's murder. Ultimately, it took 5 years for Chris to be formally charged in connection with Kelly's disappearance. The charges against him were manslaughter and concealment of a body, as investigators lacked specific evidence to prove intent. Theorizing about the events of that night, detectives speculated that Chris and Kelly had become intimate, but Chris got carried away with strangulation, leading to Kelly's death. The investigation revealed that Chris then ripped off the shower curtain, removed the rug and towels, wrapped Kelly's body, placed it in a bag, thoroughly cleaned the house, and disposed of it. Throughout the ordeal, Chris maintained his innocence in Kelly's murder. Key evidence was presented at Chris's trial, including CCTV footage, cell phone video of the strangulation, and the search of his apartment by a dog. Megan, who testified against Chris, reported that he was extremely anxious on the day of the incident and was late for a meeting. Additionally, Chris's former girlfriends took the stand, expressing their concerns about his unhealthy obsession with strangulation and rough sex, which had frightened them. The defense countered that there was no direct evidence linking Chris to the crime and that the prosecution's case was based on speculation and conjecture. Chris had a clean record before the drug possession incident and was a successful IT professional with a stable job. The defense argued that Chris was incapable of murder. However, it was discovered that not all the CCTV footage had been saved, casting doubt on the prosecution's conclusion that Kelly had not left Chris's house. The defense presented a witness who claimed to have seen a girl resembling Kelly in another man's car the weekend after she went missing. Although the witness had previously seen Kelly on TV as a missing person, he was not 100% sure it was her. The defense offered an alternative explanation for Kelly's disappearance, suggesting that she may have left Chris's apartment safely but was later caught by one of her new boyfriends. The defense also questioned the reliability of the police dog during the investigation. Since the dog's reaction was not captured on video, its alert was based solely on the police officer's subjective interpretation. In response, the prosecution argued that the investigation using the sniffer dog was conducted objectively and transparently, with multiple police officers present and agreeing on the results. Ultimately, the prosecution convinced the jury that Chris was responsible for the murder. With no other obvious suspects, the prosecution argued that Chris had planned and executed the crime carefully, deliberately destroying evidence to cover his tracks. After lengthy deliberations, the jury found Chris guilty of first-degree manslaughter and concealing a body. The Kelly family and the prosecution had asked for the maximum sentence of 48 years, while the defense asked for a reduced sentence of 22 years. In December 2018, Chris Sacco, then 43, was sentenced to 31 years in prison, including 26 years for manslaughter and 5 years for concealing a body. In addition, Chris Sacco was sentenced to 19 years for possession of child pornography and possession of narcotics, based on the outcome of his November 2014 trial. Chris Sacco is currently serving his sentence at the Green Bay Correctional Facility in Wisconsin. He will be eligible for parole in 2065, when he turns 93, essentially making his sentence a life sentence. Chris Sacco was unhappy with the sentence and attempted to appeal, but his appeal came back. Detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Madison Sparrow. Madison Elizabeth Sparrow was born on September 12, 2003, in Norfolk, Virginia, to Heather Sparrow Murphy and Richard Prestige. She has two older sisters, Molly and Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn, born in 1999 in Durango, Colorado, is from Richard's previous relationship. The family eventually settled in Newark, Delaware. Madison's younger sister, Molly, was born on October 5, 2010, and the two sisters became close. As the oldest, Madison has a natural talent for taking care of children and takes her role seriously. She enjoys spending time with her cousins, often performing comedic acts and making people laugh. Her bubbly spirit and cheerful demeanor make her a joy to be around. However, her father says she also has a more introverted side, often becoming pensive and lost in thought. From a young age, Madison demonstrated wisdom beyond her years, carefully observing situations before reacting. Friends and family appreciated Madison's loyalty and caring nature, often seeking comfort in her warm embrace. Madison had a passion for learning and exploring new experiences. This curiosity led her to join the Girl Scouts, a global organization empowering girls to develop life skills. When Madison joined the Girl Scouts at age 9, she took on the role of troop leader. Over nearly 10 years with the Girl Scouts, Madison earned numerous badges for her outstanding achievements and built lasting friendships. As she grew older, Madison's connection to the principles of Girl Scouting deepened. She volunteered to help her sister Molly's troop and remains dedicated to helping others and upholding the values of the organization. Madison frequently parties with her friends, engaging in activities like movie nights, makeup, manicures, and pedicures. Although she stays up late, she often sleeps in until 2 p.m. the next day. Before finishing elementary school, Madison befriended Anuka Stalinsky, a classmate born on July 9, 2003, in Newark. Madison and Anuka quickly became close friends. As they moved on to middle school, they expanded their circle and met Noah Sharp, a Newark native born on August 23, 2001. Noah, Madison, and Anuka often spent time together, enjoying activities like eating ice cream or going for walks around town. Noah and Madison gradually developed feelings for each other, leading to a romantic relationship. Their teenage romance blossomed quickly, and they fell deeply in love. However, their relationship took an unexpected turn in early 2020, about a year after they started dating. Madison decided to end the relationship, leaving Noah confused, as she did not give any clear reason for the breakup. After their amicable breakup, Noah remains heartbroken but finds emotional comfort in Anuka, who becomes a trusted companion. Noah and Anuka begin spending more time together and text each other daily. Despite still being sad, Noah starts dating Anuka. However, he maintains a relationship with his ex-girlfriend, Madison, and even visits her on her 17th birthday with a gift. During the visit, Madison's mother notices Noah's lingering emotional pain. Meanwhile, Anuka discovers Noah's encounter with Madison and becomes jealous. Noah's lingering resentment towards Madison turns into anger, and he wants to hurt her for not sharing his pain. Overcome with jealousy and hatred, Anuka and Noah devise a plan to harm Madison. They exchange ideas about methods and discuss ways to destroy evidence through text messages, video calls, and in-person conversations. Their conversations reveal a disturbing intent to cause Madison suffering. Anuka and Noah consider several methods, including stabbing Madison in the heart with a knife. They also consider using a handgun or blunt object to inflict fatal injuries. However, they decide against using a handgun because of the loud noise it would make. Although Noah is unsure, they ultimately decide to use a blunt object. During their discussions, they calculate the number of bricks they would need to weigh down Madison's body if they decided to dump her in a body of water. When they have doubts about this plan, they also consider burying Madison. Since Noah is used to digging and knows where to find a shovel, this seems like a viable option. They eventually come up with a plan that they think can't fail. Madison loves Halloween and ice cream. She eagerly looks forward to celebrating her favorite holiday every year. Anuka knows Madison loves Halloween and ice cream and uses this to her advantage. On Friday, October 2, 2020, Anuka calls Madison and invites her to spend the day together, using the excuse of going to buy ice cream to lure Madison into their trap. Madison quickly agrees to meet, as she has not talked to her friend for a long time. She also wants to buy a birthday present for Molly, whose birthday is in 3 days. On the day of the meeting, Madison wears black tights, denim shorts, gray boots, and a blue sweatshirt that says, New Jersey. She adds a unique touch to her outfit with a pair of white ghost earrings that she has just bought for Halloween. At 2:44 p.m., Madison says goodbye to her family and leaves. They have no idea that this will be the last time they see their daughter alive. Later that day, the Madisons begin receiving abusive text messages from Madison's phone number, along with messages saying that Madison is leaving the country. Believing it to be a prank, her father, Heather, responds with well wishes and jokes that Madison has forgotten her passport, which is in a safe. However, when Heather calls Madison, there is no answer. Heather begins to worry when she does not receive a response. Since she and Anuka have plans to meet later, Heather decides to call Anuka. As soon as Anuka picks up the phone, she bursts into tears. Anuka explains to Heather that Madison had an abusive conversation with her, then Madison got out of the car near a store. Heather suggested that Anuka call Noah, but he did not answer. Frustrated, Heather asked Anuka to try contacting him again. Eventually, the three of them talked, but they did not get any information. So Heather decided to return home. On the way home, Heather received several messages from Madison's friends. These friends also received strange messages and wanted to know what was going on. When she got home, Heather searched for any clues but found no sign that Madison had left voluntarily. Madison's birthday money, clothes, and credit cards were still in her room. Furthermore, the messages were meaningless, as Madison had no reason to run away, especially without clothes and money. When Madison had not returned home by 8:30 p.m., Heather called 911 to report that her daughter was missing. Despite her repeated attempts to contact people, all her efforts were unsuccessful. Heather notified her parents, who were in another city, of the emergency, and they came to her aid. Heather also notified Madison's father, who lives in Colorado, of Madison's disappearance. He quickly shared the information on social media to call for help in finding his daughter. On Saturday, October 3, 2020, authorities issued a yellow alert after Madison, a 17-year-old, went missing. In Delaware, this type of alert is activated when a person under the age of 18 goes missing and triggers the necessary search measures to find Madison. After receiving the report, police search teams, along with Madison's family and friends, began searching for Madison on farms near the University of Delaware, where she was last seen. They also worked with the media to inform the public about the incident and asked people to come forward with information. At the same time, the authorities also began questioning Madison's friends to gather information. Many sources indicated that Madison's ex-boyfriend, Noah, might be involved in the case. Some information showed that he was with Madison in the woods in Newark before she went missing. After investigating, the police arrested Noah and questioned him for 9 hours on October 4th and 5th. During the interrogation, Noah gave different statements but insisted that he did not know what happened to Madison. Finally, the silence was broken, and everyone was shocked, and the young man confessed to his horrific act. He claimed that he had killed the girl and that Anuka was an accomplice. When reporting to the police, Noah said that Anuka was jealous of Madison's relationship with him. He shared that he was deeply hurt after breaking up with Madison and that it made him lose control. According to Noah, Anuka took Madison to the woods behind the elementary school. Noah hid behind a bush and attacked Madison with an aluminum baseball bat. Madison was not expecting this and was happy to spend time with her friend. Noah said he hit Madison twice in the head, and the second hit caused him to lose control and use a lot of force. He then continued to strike her body several more times. After the attack, Noah and Anuka moved Madison's body in Anuka's car to a location under a bridge near the intersection of I-95 and the Delaware state line, about 15 minutes from the crime scene and near a warehouse. Upon arriving at the scene, Noah and Anuka attempted to push the body into the river but were unsuccessful. Instead, they chose to hide the body in a shallow grave. With detailed information from Noah, investigators thoroughly searched the designated area. There, they found the aluminum baseball bat, the weapon used, with traces of blood. Investigators also found the clothes Madison was wearing when she left the house, along with several burned items. Noah then led police to a large wooded area near the intersection of I-95 and Delaware State Road, where Noah and Anuka hid Madison's body. On Monday, October 5, 2020, the police announced the discovery of Madison's body. The revelation shocked Madison's family, friends, and the entire community. Days later, on Friday, October 9th, hundreds gathered at the high school football field to remember and honor Madison. An autopsy revealed that Madison died from blunt force trauma to the head. Additionally, experts found DNA from Noah and Anuka in the physical evidence collected at the crime scene and where the body was discovered. Noah faces charges of first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon during the commission of a crime, and first-degree conspiracy. He has been committed to a correctional facility with bail set at $1 million. On Monday, November 16, 2020, more than a month after Madison's murder and following the processing of necessary evidence, 17-year-old Anuka was also arrested. She was taken into custody after a Newcastle County grand jury indicted her on charges of first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon during the commission of a felony, and first-degree conspiracy. Meanwhile, Madison's family remains in a state of grief. Heather has repeatedly stated that a plausible reason for her daughter's death will never be found. Heather believes that dangerous killers should be locked up for life after double murder. Although Noah admitted to detectives that he committed the crime, he denied it in his formal court indictment. Noah's defense argued that Noah was mentally unstable. Attorneys often attempt to justify their clients by citing mental instability. And this case is no exception. During one of the preliminary hearings, Noah's attorney stated that Noah was being treated for schizophrenia and was under the care of a psychiatrist at the time of the murder. The attorney also asserted that Noah had suffered an injury in Chester County, Pennsylvania, approximately 3 weeks prior to the murder, which caused him memory loss and other issues. However, in May 2021, Anuka pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and first-degree conspiracy. Her attorneys reached a deal with prosecutors in which Anuka agreed to testify against Noah regarding his intention to end Madison's life. According to court documents, several individuals, including those close to Madison, informed the police about Noah's second personality, known as alter ego. However, prosecutors argued that Noah himself disseminated this information as part of a plan to justify his actions by proving he was mentally ill. He spread the rumors in advance, intending to use this information in court later. After 2 long years of waiting for justice, on October 20, 2022, the trial of the defendant began in Newcastle County. During the proceedings, approximately 30 witnesses were called, most by Deputy Attorney General Matt Foley. The Newcastle County courtroom played hours of video footage of Noah's interrogation by state police detectives. Viewers heard Noah's constantly changing accounts until he finally confessed. The defense attempted to challenge this evidence, insisting that the police had questioned their client for too long and had influenced Noah's testimony. Attorney Monica Jerome noted that the detectives manipulated the interrogation by telling Noah what to say and pressuring him. However, it was clear to everyone that these were just desperate attempts to justify the murder in any way possible. The prosecution presented text messages between Noah and Anuka that showed they were planning the crime. Faced with this evidence, the defense tried to convince the court that someone else had used Noah's device and that he was not the one communicating with Anuka. Noah's mother and brother were called to testify, but their testimonies were inconsistent. Noah's mother, Nakia, claimed that her son was not wet when he came home on the evening of October 2nd. In contrast, his brother David said that Noah was soaked and looked like he had been in a swamp. Nakia later said that when Noah came home, Anuka came in calmly, but David described Anuka as angrily slamming the door. Prosecutor Matt Foley asked Nakia if she had discussed the evidence against Noah with him, and she said no. However, the prosecutor played a recording of a phone call between Noah and his mother from a month before the trial. During the conversation, they discussed surveillance camera evidence from the elementary school. Noah told his mother that his face was not shown in the video, although he and Anuka had been near the school about an hour before Madison was killed. She reacted with relief when the video was released, showing an African-American man of Noah's height and build, holding a baseball bat and walking into the woods with a girl. The defense also questioned the defendant's relatives about the head injury he allegedly suffered on September 13, 2020, and an unconfirmed fall from a bicycle accident hours before he was questioned by police on October 4. Noah's attorney argued that these injuries could have caused dissociative amnesia in order to justify the statements he made to police. In response, the prosecutor questioned whether the injuries were part of a plot to kill Madison, something the defense contested with some uncertainty. Anuka affirmed all of the prosecution's arguments during the 3-hour trial. During her testimony, she calmly explained that Noah had convinced her that Madison had talked behind her back, although Madison's friends and family were adamant that Madison had never done so. After 8 days of trial and more than 250 pieces of evidence presented by the prosecutor, the jury took just 3 hours to reach a verdict. Noah Sharp was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the jury's verdict was announced, Noah and his mother showed no emotion. Noah simply turned to smile at his mother. Madison's family cried tears of relief before leaving the courtroom. Heather, Madison's mother, echoed her daughter's words, "Choose the light, not the dark. Love conquers all." She also expressed gratitude to her friends and family. This has been a 2-year process, and we couldn't have done it without their continued love and support. We also want to thank everyone, especially Newark Charter School, the Board of Trustees, and families who have supported the Love Wins 5K over the past 2 years, as well as the Madison Sparrow Memorial Scholarship to support future educators. Regarding Anuka, when Noah was found guilty, prosecutors said that under Delaware law, she faced life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years because she was a minor at the time of the crime.